Out of nowhere, gates leading to other worlds appeared all over the earth. These dungeons already contain walking monsters and countless treasures. People looking for new opportunities and dreams began to dive into these dungeons. Making your way through the dungeons was not easy, but there was one adventurer named John. When John once again made his way into a new dungeon, he was met by the monster Bakhmut. The guy just laughed because this time there was only one monster. The monster hovering in the sky thought that he would soon be able to destroy the gate, and when that happened, he would leave this terrifying place. To which the guy replied that he should stop his monologues and say that he would quickly put it out now. To which the monster only replied that the guy was crazy, and he added that it looked like he would be able to enjoy this battle. The monster said that he would make sure that not even ashes remained of the guy. Well, suddenly, without even starting the fight, the monster flew into the wall and was shocked by this. The guy stood calmly and told him not to dare look down on him. He also thought that the monster was restricting his movements. When John saw the blazing fire in front of him, he was surprised. To which the monster did not understand how it happened that he was a god, but he lost to a pathetic man. At one time, an inept adventurer, John rose to the top of this world. After John finished with the monster, he decided to go to the next dungeon. At the same time, special powers, later called skills, awakened in some people, and only a small number of the population possessed skills. Sometime after the incident, an organization was created for those who wanted to try their luck in the dungeon, which is now called the Adventurers Guild. Everyone must have skills if they want to challenge the harsh dungeons. There is not a single person who would dare to become an adventurer without having some skills. When the guy approached the reception, he was asked if he really wanted to become an adventurer, to which the guy replied that he agreed and asked to register him. There was a girl standing next to him, and then John asked again if she was really sure that she wanted to become an adventurer without any skills. It was clear from the girl's eyes that she was happy because she couldn't wait to start working together. John thought that he couldn't even imagine that there would be someone as crazy as he at the reception desk. But suddenly someone pushed John and his girlfriend and asked at the reception desk that two incompetents were going to become adventurers. The man said that this was pure suicide and said to allow him to personally demonstrate to the newcomers how everything was set up there. Then the woman at the reception agreed with the man and said that in that case, she would give the two of them to a man named Tom. Adventurers are divided into ranks. The so-called middle or rank includes many veterinarians. Tom said that in that case he would be happy to keep the guy and girl up to date as he did from a middle rank. A girl named Jessica asked the guy about the fact that he also did not have any skills. Jack said that they were making a lot of money, and although he didn't have the skills, he also wanted to make his dream come true. When adventurers defeat dungeon monsters, they drop magic stones and various items. Magic stones are quite valuable. Even the lowest rank stone can cost a lot of money. Jack said that he had reasons why he simply had to make a lot of money, no matter what. Because he lives with his 15-year-old sister, and their parents are missing, and now Jack is paying for his sister's education. Their life could not be called rich, but the guy was very happy. Every time the boy came home, he loudly announced his presence and called his sister to come to him. When his sister didn't come, he would look into her room and ask if she was sleeping. One day, seeing his sister with no signs of life, the boy became very scared. Taking her to the doctor, he learned that his sister had awakened a special skill that was devouring her body. It was a rare case of the disease, the first in Japan. The only cure was a new drug from the USA. This medicine was too expensive for John. Jessica noted that adventurers were people who followed their dreams and asked if he was looking forward to something similar. The guy laughed and agreed with the girl. Tom led them into a room where the man asked if they were the newbies he had written about in the chat. Many looked down on those who failed to awaken the skills, considering them incompetent. A young man from the crowd greeted the newcomers and noted that they would learn a lot from watching their elders. A confused Jessica greeted everyone. John remained calm and did not worry. Tom suggested that they go to the dungeon immediately, promising to explain everything along the way. Confused, Jessica asked to wait. John wanted the men to explain everything to them beforehand. The guy thought about the word that was troubling him. He tried to understand what exactly he saw in front of him, because he did not understand anything. Jack's status in the guild showed a lack of skills, which was explained by the presence of hidden talent. The mechanism of the prohibition restriction worked simply. John planned to level up and use the skill points he gained. His goal is to restore magic from a past life. He was essentially a reincarnator. In his past life, he achieved the heights of magic, receiving the title of a lone Archmage. But having mastered magic, he did not experience the same joy as in this life. John's achievements in his past life were nothing compared to his sister's talents. The amount needed for the medicine was beyond his means, even with a lifetime of hard work. So John decided to become an adventurer to make some quick money. although even high-ranking adventurers would have a hard time accumulating such a sum in a short period of time. But the prohibitive restriction made this impossible. The guy was determined to earn money for treatment. As he entered the dungeon, he thought about his sister waiting for him. Tom explained that the lower-ranked dungeons are the easiest. He also advised the guy and the girl to watch his actions closely. Jessica noticed John's thoughtfulness and asked if everything was okay. The boy thought that, as he expected, his new comrades had no intention of teaching them, but it was still better than threats. When he said that Jessica liked it here, she happily exclaimed that she had always dreamed of becoming an adventurer. John advised her to watch carefully and learn. The girl blushed and agreed. Their conversation was interrupted by Tom's cry for them to run. After they moved away, a monster collapsed next to them. Tom came up and asked if everything was okay. Jessica replied that, fortunately, the column collapsed just in time. The gates in the dungeon began to open, and Tom announced that the boss would appear soon. The first condition is met. They reached the boss room without taking damage. The second condition was met. They brought in 2 newcomers. The third condition is met. Among them, there is a person with an awakened skill. It's time to summon an additional boss. This meant that the path of retreat was cut off. A frightened Jessica asked John if Tom and his comrades could defeat the monster. John replied that all they could do was believe in their comrades. When Tom approached the monster, it quickly dealt with him. Such sweeping attacks, when the difference in strength is obvious, are easy to counterattack. Tom rushed to save his comrades, thinking that he did not know if his plan would work, but he had to try. It all seemed incomprehensible. Was this really all they were capable of? When John stepped forward, everyone looked at him in surprise. John said that he had a plan to defeat the boss and asked everyone to follow his instructions. Omnipotent hidden skills of forbidden restriction. There was a special reason for this restriction. In exchange for being able to use magic without Ohm, all of the spells from his past life were sealed. Perhaps when John removes the limitations placed on him, he will be able to surpass his former self. After John explained the plan of action to everyone, a storm of indignation erupted. Tom was surprised by John's movements and asked if he was really incompetent. Everyone started yelling at John for lying to them. When a huge monster appeared before them, John asked if their main goal was to destroy it. John asked for some time to himself. Tom promised to do his best. While Tom was fighting the monster, his comrades stood in complete amazement. Tom asked how much time John needed. John replied that he would need 3 minutes if possible. John had already encountered mentors in his past life. The other monsters in this dungeon were not of the same level. If they had fought them with normal tactics, John's team would have lost long ago. John said he had only one way to defeat the mentor. The guy asked Jessica if she could help him. The girl asked again in surprise, her eyes widening, after which she added that he couldn't, and she would never hurt this monster. Then John put his hand on her shoulder and asked if this was what she had dreamed about. The girl hesitated, not knowing how to answer. The guy explained that he needed the girl's help to defeat the cop, and asked for her assistance. The girl gathered her strength and finally made up her mind. Jessica asked what she should do. The guy said he didn't have time to explain, and he just had to sit still. John added so that the girl would not be angry with him later. Then the guy put his hand under her clothes. The girl got very scared and asked what he was doing. Although it definitely looked like harassment, it was actually the guy's secret plan. Minotaurs are weak to magical attacks, but John couldn't inflict a mortal wound with his magic himself. He only had low-level skills, so they lacked power. To defeat this cop, they had to attack him with a powerful spell. At that moment, due to the forbidden restriction, John could not use any of his spells. That's why the guy decided to use Jessica's magic. Since it was quite simple, he needed to gain control over the girl's magic chain. Although it could still be considered sexual harassment, the girl retreated in fear and asked him to stop. When the guy walked away, she looked at her hands and was very shocked. John asked Jessica if she felt some kind of force building inside her body. The girl asked in fear what John had just done. The guy explained that he simply took the necessary measures so that she could use magic. The girl reminded that she had no skills. John reassured her that everything was fine and that she had a talent for magic. He added that this is why he relies on her. When Tom could no longer stand, he called John and said that he could not stand any longer. The girl was afraid that the monster would kill them, but John asked her to calm down and repeat after him. Then everything would work. The guy added that, although this language is unfamiliar to Jessica, it will be a little difficult for her, but he will try to explain it briefly. Then the girl began to blaze with a bright fire. Despite her lack of combat experience, she maintained amazing concentration in this difficult situation. John asked the girl to point her hands towards the Minotaur. After this, John cast the spell Fireball Crimson. Jessica repeated after the guy, pointing her hands towards the monster. After these words, the monster was instantly incinerated. The girl looked at this with admiration. The guy said he couldn't have achieved this without Jessica's help. The girl was embarrassed and thanked John. Level increased, title Archmage Reincarnation received. After defeating the Minotaur, John and everyone left the dungeon and called an ambulance. Fortunately, everyone was in stable condition, although they were seriously injured. John had no excuse for what he put Tom and his friends through. Deep in the dungeon lies its core. If this core is destroyed, the dungeon will collapse. Usually the core is destroyed after the dungeon is captured, but in some cases, such as to create a training ground for adventurers, it is left intact. It appears that this core was created using technology from another world. After John and Jessica finished in the dungeon, they returned to the Adventurers Guild. After that, they will receive their guild cards and wait for analysis and records. A young man approached John and Jessica and thanked them for waiting. He introduced himself as Bob, a member of the General Affairs Department of the Adventurers Guild. He approached them to ask a few questions about the additional boss that had appeared. After Bob handed them the cards, he asked them to take questions. John wondered if Jessica would keep her promise. That John helped her use magic. It was important to him because it could become a big problem, especially when people started asking him about what happened. After all, the guy had to start earning money as soon as possible. The girl agreed with him and promised not to tell anyone. Jessica apologized to the guy and said that she was ashamed to ask for such a thing after what he told her. The girl asked to be taken as a student, but in response she heard a refusal and was very upset. The girl understood that the guy could not take her as a student. John explained that he was refusing not because it was a hassle, or because of her reaction at the time. The guy said that he felt like the girl wasn't cut out to be an adventurer. John stated that he did not want to irresponsibly teach her magic and send her to certain death. To which the girl replied that she was sorry, but perhaps the guy was right. The young man asked again. It turns out that after Tom's group, the monster was already on the verge of death, and Jessica dealt the final blow to the weakened Minotaur. John confirmed that everything was correct, since they had no skills. The man asked Jessica what she was doing while Tom's group was fighting the Mentor. The girl replied in confusion that she had simply watched their battle, and when the man was on the verge of death, she and John had dealt the final blow. John said they decided it was the only thing they could do. The man noted that the boy and the girl delivered the last blow together, which is why it is registered to Jessica. After this, the man confirmed that the two of them had indeed managed to defeat the cop without any skills, and thanked them for their cooperation. He then handed out 2 envelopes and said that this was their reward for defeating the Mentor. Taking the envelopes, they thanked the man, and John thought about the amount of money that was inside. When he opened the envelope, there was a sum of money in it much larger than he expected. The man explained that this was how much it cost to defeat the brand. The guild rules stated that 75% of the reward went to the person who dealt the final blow. Jessica thanked the man again, confused. Everything was fair. This was done so that the entire reward did not go to the person who dealt the final blow. Thus, the guild leader encourages not only those who have attacking skills. The man said that if he and the girl were in a clan, the reward would be divided equally, and suggested that they think about joining a clan. He added that the guild leader has high hopes for them, to which the guy laughed, saying that they were incompetent and would do their best. So John earned half the amount on his first day working for the Adventurers Guild. But suddenly John decided to give the entire amount to Jessica. The girl said that she could not accept such an amount, because she had done nothing. The guy explained that without her help, he wouldn't have been able to do anything either, so he asked her to keep the envelope. The girl wanted to say something, but the guy interrupted her, saying that if the two of them didn't need him, then she could just burn him. But suddenly the girl attacked the guy and said that there was no way she could burn such a large sum. Then the guy said that she should keep the whole amount for herself. After this, the guy and the girl exchanged contacts and went their separate ways. He thought about how he hadn't fought like this for a long time, and it seemed like his feelings hadn't dulled. The guy was shocked that he actually received a large sum for defeating some cop. The guy thought it was time to have lunch, but suddenly the guy remembered his sister and thought that she would have to wait a little longer, since he would soon earn the required amount. The guy remembered that he had leveled up and seemed to have earned skill points. The boy reached level 10 and could now summon a controlling fairy. When the boy pressed the button to summon the fairy, everything around him turned to dust. A suitcase fell on the guy's table, and a little fairy flew out of it. Before the guy could say anything, sparkling dust began to fly all over his house. Suddenly the fairy started yelling at him because the guy had missed training for 20 years. Suddenly the guy pushed her away a little and didn't understand why the little fairy was so mad. He asked her to wait a little and told her to explain who she was before scolding him. Then the fairy thought for a moment and decided to tell. She was created by John in a past life as a controller of forbidden restrictions. The fairy had only one very important goal for Jack. When the boy asked what it was exactly, The fairy said that its purpose was to make him stronger. That's why the fairy was disappointed that the guy had been idle for 20 years. The guy thought about the fact that he didn't understand how he created her in his past life for 20 years. Then the fairy said that apparently the guy was missing some of his memories. After the fairy spoke about the empty memory, the guy thought about it and realized that it was impossible. But suddenly the guy said that he remembered, unexpectedly even for himself. Then the fairy looked thoughtfully at the guy and asked if he had an idea. The boy said he didn't remember the moment of his death, but he remembered that he was affected by some kind of illness. The fairy said that she could tell him that she was born after his death. The guy thought about her words and thought that it seemed like his reincarnation was not accidental. The fairy said that there was simply no point in thinking about it. The guy thought about the fact that apparently the fairy cannot tell him about this, since perhaps the past he limited the range of what she can talk about. And he also thought that the fairy was right, since thinking about all this in these circumstances was simply pointless. The boy asked the fairy what she meant when she said she wanted to make him stronger. The fairy said that by updating the forbidden restrictions, the guy can become stronger even faster. The guy asked if this was any different from gaining skills through exchanging points. The fairy said that gaining skills was nowhere near that. Suddenly the fairy did something and a new system called item exchange was added. The guy was very surprised at what the fairy could do. The fairy said that with her help, the guy would be able to get any item that he ever owned in his past life. The guy asked if he could move the items that were in the storage box. The storage box is a spatial storage that the boy created in his past life as an Archmage. The fairy said that at the time the guy was an avid collector and he had a lot of rare things that he could return. The guy was even more surprised, saying that it was incredible. The fairy said that everything is not so simple, since there are certain conditions for the exchange. The guy got a little angry and said that every good story has its downsides. The fairy warned that if the boy complained, she would not allow him to use this system. The boy apologized to the fairy, and then she showed him everything that belonged to him in his past life. Friend, the guy thought about the fact that the thing he was thinking about was also there. After looking at the pictures for a bit, he found what he was looking for. It was an all-powerful elixir that instantly relieves all diseases and injuries. The guy thought that he really should earn that big sum of money that he was thinking about all the time. The fairy noticed that this seemed to motivate the boy a little. The fairy said that she had news for the guy, and he asked her to tell him. The fairy said that during his battle with the mentor, she thought that the guy could easily become stronger, overcoming difficulties on his way. That's why the fairy put a buff on him, thanks to which he will receive twice as much experience when defeating a superior enemy. The boy asked the fairy how it works. He thought that if the fairy was telling the truth, then his path would be much easier. The guy said he would use the forbidden restrictions at full capacity. The fairy was delighted, noting his fighting spirit. The guy remembered that he hadn't even asked her name, and decided to ask her what her name was. The fairy replied that she did not know, since he had created her and had to come up with a name for her. John warned the fairy not to complain or cry if she didn't like something. The boy named the fairy sphere and she said it was a nice name. The guy noted that the fairy seemed to like the name, to which she responded that they needed to focus on making it stronger. The fairy set her own rules: prepare a bath, desserts, and ice cream every day. The guy objected that all this required money, to which the fairy replied that she controlled the forbidden restrictions, and, if he did not agree, she could forbid him from using it. Then the guy got indignant and asked if that was the fee for using it. The fairy said that she was glad that the guy understood everything, and he would need to start doing these things from the next day. Before going to bed, the guy thought that this fairy had fallen on him out of the blue. After looking at his rating, John thought he was too weak. But for him, it will be even better, because he will be able to change this and become an Archmage. He will also be able to reach a much higher rank than his current one, but within reasonable limits. With the help of the Adventurers Guild, he will join a raid in a higher rank dungeon. A man approached John, asked his name and introduced himself. His name was Oliver. There was a girl with the man. She also introduced herself. Her name was Emma. Oliver said that they were one person short of making the group complete, and so John practically saved them. Two guys were talking about John and he overheard it. John said he could make up for his lack of skills. The guy introduced himself as Sam and told John not to overexert himself so much, since there were 3 adventurers in the group with a similar rank to John. Then Sam's acquaintances noted that he himself was of low rank. The girl standing nearby was eavesdropping on their conversation when Tom noticed her and thought that she was the same age as his sister. From the loudspeakers, we heard sounds that since everyone was gathered, it was time to go to another dungeon. John noticed the guy next to him. The entire team present in the dungeon fought tirelessly. Someone advised John to stay behind as this place was very dangerous. But John stood behind and wondered when would be the best time to join the fight. Then the monster approached one of the fighting girls. John noticed that the monster was calling on magic, and this ogre was going to use fire breath on her, and it seemed like the girl noticed it. At that moment, John attacked the monster with all his anger. The girl said, "Didn't they tell him to stay behind?" John replied that he simply couldn't ignore a child who was oblivious to an approaching attack. The girl asked in surprise what the guy was talking about. The guy thought he had managed to stop the monster from using fire breathing. The guy decided to use his new weapon. Last night, the guy decided he wanted to make the most of his skill points. But there was one problem. The guy was only level 10 and had 9 points at his disposal. And the first skills he could get were Fireball. When purchasing, the corresponding skill tree is displayed on the screen, and the guy must first choose one of them. Fireball is good for mid to long range combat, but on the other hand, Buff has no such limitations. If something happens, it will be more useful at close range. Any skill acquired through Forbidden Restriction does not consume Ohm. This means that John will be able to use the enhancement anywhere and anytime. Such a skill will obviously be extremely useful. He decided to look at his skill tree. For a guy, the new skill was pretty good. The right branch was more suited to close combat, and since skill points weren't infinite, the guy decided to focus on the first close combat. He told John that for his own safety, he should step back. Then John said that even an extra like him had something to offer. At that moment, the system notified the guy that he had received double experience for defeating a strong opponent, and his level had been increased. Everyone standing nearby was amazed at John's strength and could not believe that he had dealt with a monster. Catherine couldn't believe her eyes and asked where exactly he was an extra. John thought that compared to the Minotaur, 2 levels for a win was the best he could expect. At that moment, a girl came up to him and asked how the guy could be so strong. Then John replied that he had only received the skill yesterday and was trying to catch his breath after the fight. Catherine, hearing this, seriously told the guy to warn her about something like this in advance. At first he remained silent, but then he realized that the girl was right. Catherine kept saying that if something happened to him, it would be too late. Then John once again apologized for this and said that it would not happen again. Then the girl began to turn away and clearly wanted to say something last, but she was a little nervous. Gathering all her confidence into a fist, she thanked John for saving her life. The other warriors at this time were discussing that they did not expect the guy to be so strong, and realized that now they would have to divide the spoils equally. Then one of them, looking at John, said that since he was so strong, they would be able to clear the dungeon much faster, and the other warrior apologized to the guy for being rude to him. Then John told the guys to forgive him too for not warning everyone in advance. Although in fact the guy didn't tell them precisely because, having learned the truth, they might reject his application to join. However, in reality, their raid went relatively smoothly. And then, shortly after they defeated the boss, the experience points doubled. This is why John was able to increase his level to 17. And now the team was getting ready to return and was discussing how smoothly everything went. One of the guys told John that his abilities exceeded all his expectations. Then the guy replied that it was not true and his contribution was much greater. Then they boldly decided to return to the guild, since they had finished clearing the dungeon. Suddenly he noticed that his chest was pierced from behind with a knife, and he did not understand what had happened. It turned out to be a guy who was a member of their team, and he mercilessly pulled out the dagger after the blow. Everyone started shouting what he was doing and why. Then the guy with a crazy smile on his face said that he was most likely committing murder. And then he also added that his partner should not make such a terrible face, but rather, like before, smile. At that moment, one of them attacked this psychopath and began to attack. Everyone was told not to interfere, and people stood there not knowing what to do. Sam said that he would not calm down until he killed him with his own hands. Catherine started shouting that now was not the time for such speeches. At that moment, John came out and said that he also had things that he would never give up. Then the other man said that it was still not worth it for that guy to risk his life alone. John said that from a logical point of view this is true, but the world is full of illogical things. Catherine said it was stupid, and the guy understood what she was getting at. Then the guy on their team turned around and thanked them. After that, taking his sword more firmly, he told the team to leave that psycho to him. John started talking about Sam at this time. He thought the guy's weapon looked pretty dangerous. For every person killed, 5 points were added to his attack, and his knife was now significantly more powerful than it had been originally. The psychopath at this point asked the guy if he really thought he could beat him. He fought off the attacks and reasoned that his strength should have been enough to break through Sam's defense. At that moment, the guy realized that all this time the psycho had been hiding his rank, and it was much higher than everyone could think. Sam asked if the guy used a longsword and added that it was effective against monsters. The guy kept saying that he was pretty slow against people. The psychopath asked if the guy really expected to kill him with such force. The guy held the bottle of potion in his hand and remembered how his partner gave it to him. After that, the partner told the guy to consider it a birthday present and read the effect later. He asked if the potion was expensive. Then the partner replied that it was expensive, but this was his way of expressing his gratitude. The guy smiled and said he was happy, after which he thanked him. The partner added that he should use this potion in extreme cases, and said that being an adventurer is difficult. After these memories, the boy began to quickly drink the potion and hoped that it would save him. Sam ran up to him and asked him if he thought it was a good time to get his health back. At this time, the guy got to his feet and began to prepare for the attack with renewed vigor. Jumping high into the air, he began to attack Sam. However, the guy immediately realized that it was useless, because he did not see him. Sam started shouting that he was a fool for daring to compete with him. Jessica held the sword in her hand with furious eyes, saying that she couldn't watch this. The girl with a surprised face was perplexed as to how he had dodged. Sam asked her with a smirk, "What? Hadn't she been warned not to interfere?" The young girl looked at the guy with fear. Sam pinned Jessica to the floor, telling her he would have to start with her. Sam had already swung at the girl, but then John appeared and stopped him with his sword. He was surprised that this young man was able to stop him. John asked the guy if he could get rid of Sam. This guy gave his consent for John to defeat him. John told Sam that it was now his turn to deal with him. Sam asked why the guy was getting on his nerves. As John was throwing him back, the guy asked him if he thought some extra could beat him. Then John just grinned and said that he didn't scare him one bit. The psycho started crawling towards the guy and saying that he had only recently received his skill, so there was no point in bragging about it. John understood perfectly well that now was not the time to stand on ceremony. Sam stood up at that moment and shouted for the guy to know his place, because he was nothing but just an extra. However, John was able to deflect his blow, and then the boy noted that he had a keen eye. Then John said that whoever was carrying it didn't pose that much of a threat. The psychopath became even more angry and frowning said that he clearly posed a threat. He really liked the guy's attitude, because he could get a bonus for killing John. Then, while the psycho continued to attack the guy, he only said that he should have explained everything in simpler language. After these words, John also added that the guy's speed did not pose a threat to him. And so they were face to face and sword to sword, deflecting each other's attacks. The girl was surprised that the guy really turned out to be so strong. Sam was shocked that the guy managed to block the blow, and he realized that he had caught up with him. John's ball handling and defensive performance were a level above that of the average rookie. Sam began to feel this terrible feeling that suppressed his faith in victory. Namely, he felt its superior, boundless power. John, with a frightening face, asked the guy again what he called him, and then answered his own question. Sam was thinking at this point that he was obviously superior to him in terms of characteristics, but the guy still overwhelmed him. At that moment, John approached the girl, adjusted her hair, and told her to be a good girl. After that, he instantly pierced the psychopath with his weapon. The guy began to say that this step was the most obvious, because it was the most vile plan worthy of a coward like him. Sam started screaming that it wasn't over yet and tried to use his skills. John just laughed at the fact that the guy couldn't use them anymore, and then said that the game was over. The psycho started asking the guy what he did, and John just laughed in response. After that, I started to think that skills and spells are similar, because they require The guy hit the vulnerable point of the mana channel in Sam's body. That's why he couldn't use his skills. The guy started saying that he couldn't win with his speed, and now he can't use his skills either. Sam said he never thought the guy would corner him. After that, he started laughing loudly and saying that he would share some interesting information with John. The guy asked the psychopath about this information with an arrogant look. Sam told the guy to kill him with this dagger because he gets stronger every time someone is killed with it. The dagger becomes stronger from killing people. But everyone hides this fact so that the adventurers don't start killing each other. Hearing this, the girl realized that the guy really was a psycho. He began to say that he was giving the dagger to John, and suggested that they try to kill him first. After this, the devil guy will know what it's like to take someone's life. Then John asked if that was the sting that made the guy kill people left and right. Sam asked to quickly kill him with this knife and end it all. Then John said that he even sympathized a little with the guy. Some of his feelings were quite understandable to the guy, and it seemed he couldn't escape this damn desire to become stronger. If it weren't for the ban on restrictions for his sister's sake, John would have become the same as this psycho. In his past life, he saw many people who had to choose a path that would make them stronger. At this point, Sam started shouting that the guy didn't know anything about him, because everything John said irritated him. He simply asked to kill him, but John had no intention of doing so. Hearing this, the psycho asked why, because he himself said that he understood part of his feelings. Moreover, John thought that he and this guy were similar, and after saying this, Sam began to ask to kill him even more. John said that if he did that, something inside him would die. So the guy wasn't going to kill him. Then Sam started rolling a ball out of his mouth and said that John was very naive. It was a smoke bomb that exploded, and now everything was shrouded in a veil of smoke. The psycho started shouting that he would make the guy give up this naivety and took the dagger in his hands. He decided to be the trigger for this and kill himself. Then John said that before he died, he should atone for his sins and hit Sam. At that moment, the girl said that she didn't think they looked alike. Until the very end, the boy's desire to save his life remained unshakable, and he even thought about saving him. Hearing this, John smiled and asked if she was worried about him. Then she became embarrassed and immediately shouted that it was completely logical and stuttered a little. She started saying that at that moment the guy scared her a little. When John put his hand on her head, he asked for forgiveness for it and then thanked her. When the girl, looking away, also thanked the guy for saving her. After this incident, Sam was arrested. The guy in the room cried and thanked John. He said that he was only alive thanks to him, and therefore did not know how to properly express his gratitude. When Sam suddenly attacked him, a little more and he would have hit vital organs. Thanks to the fact that the battle with the psycho ended rather quickly, he was able to avoid death. John believed that the case could be considered closed. And so, that evening in the hospital, he told the girl that there was only black coffee in the machine. She told the guy not to mistake her for a child and took the bottle away. When John tasted it, he could see on her face that she definitely didn't like the taste. Then he asked what the girl wanted to ask him. Then she looked away a little, and then said that she wanted to know the secret of his strength. Hearing this, John said that he was interested in why the girl was working as an adventurer at such a young age. Suddenly she stood up and shouted whether it really mattered now, and then said that she was a high school student. Then John looked at her and said that it turned out that she was older than Sarah. The girl, confused, asked again who it was, and the guy answered that it was his little sister. After that, Catherine smiled because she was surprised to learn that he had a little sister. Then she said that he was very reliable and reasonable, like a real older brother. John looked askance at the girl and then asked if it was a compliment. Catherine replied that she was amazed by his fighting prowess and instant adaptation. Then sipping his black coffee, John thanked the girl. That's why Catherine wanted John to share his secret power. She looked at him with an angelic gaze, and then John told her to stop because he would dream about it later. Suddenly the girl drooped, and then said in a quiet voice that she would never stop. Catherine told the guy to show her his true strength, because she was sure that there was some secret in it. Then John realized that he needed to tell her in simple words that he was not going to do this. The girl told the guy that he was greedy, and calmly took the can of coffee. After this, Catherine also told him that no girl would want to date such a cold guy. She also called the guy a man with a sister complex, which clearly offended John. Suddenly, Catherine asked if she could look at the guy's hand, and then, at that very second, his wound was covered with a bandage. Then John realized that this girl was too carefree, and this would definitely not confuse him. At that moment, Catherine saw his smile and was struck by how wide it was. John replied that she had clearly imagined it, and the most that could have been on his face was a small grin. Then the girl replied that this was to be expected, since such a sweet high school girl was courting the guy. The guy thought she was saying something like that, but she had a smile on her face that almost reached her ears. Catherine took the phone and told the guy to give her his contact information, because she still had a lot of questions for him. John agreed and said that if that was all it was, he would be happy to help at any time. Hearing this, the girl said that next time they should go to the dungeon together. John said that they could only go if he had time and finished his coffee. The girl only noted that if he says so, it means he is not ready to help her at any time. When they parted, the girl said that next time she wanted to meet his little sister. John waved to her one last time and smiled. When the guy came home, it was already dark outside. John calmly took a shower and thought that he would definitely cure his little sister as soon as he could. Suddenly, a small explosion occurred right above his phone. It didn't harm the guy, but it scared him. A small creature appeared right in front of him and began to talk. She was clearly unhappy with his daily schedule and made it clear. She continued to shout that because of all the sawing, John had only prepared a bath, and the guy stood there in bewilderment. He realized that he had completely forgotten about everything and the little creature continued to threaten the guy. Hearing these threats, John began to ask for forgiveness and say that he would definitely prepare everything tomorrow. Then this little girl said he was hopeless and forgave him for the last time. As John began to dry his head with a towel, she continued to say that the guy was nothing but trouble. And after that she said that the generous fairy had great news for the guy. She started to tell me that she had added the key to the secret dungeon to the item exchange. Hearing this, John began to talk about this dungeon in surprise. The fairy said that this is the key to a super difficult solo dungeon. The guy thought it sounded interesting and decided to look into it a little. There were actually a lot of different ranks in this dungeon, and one of them had some kind of discount. The fairy explained that this was fuel to make the guy want to buy more and more things. John, listening to her, said that the girl was really used to this world. The fairy replied that it was useless to praise her, and suggested that she quickly use the key and increase her level. The guy understood perfectly well that he needed to level up, but even with the discount, the dungeon cost $1 million. John also reasoned that he could afford it. Considering how much he would earn, however, in the secret dungeon, the monsters were much stronger than usual. Therefore, John could get more experience for the forbidden restriction from them, and with the buff, the guy could get even more benefit. John would have to go there alone, so the difficulty would be quite high. In other words, the greater the risk, the greater the reward, so the guy was interested. The fairy thought that he was scared and began to laugh at him. Then John explained that for now, he would save money to buy the keys to the dungeon for $5 million. The girl noted that he is a truly interesting person. The guy decided to ask if the forbidden restriction was really useful. And then he said that his legacy in his past life was so great. John knew he had his past self to thank and began to gain rank. The system showed the guy that he had used the key to the secret dungeon. A dark door appeared in front of him, emitting an ominous aura. The fairy asked if the boy was really going to go there right now, since he had just recently returned from the dungeon. John said he wasn't going to waste a second. The girl was pleased that the guy had finally gotten a taste for it, and she smiled sarcastically. After seeing the dungeon for a bit, the guy said that everything in it looked as usual. Then the fairy said that he spoke like a real lone Archmage. The guy began to thank the sphere, because thanks to it, he would become stronger in the blink of an eye. The girl replied that he would thank her only when he returned unharmed. Then, with a smile on his face, John said that if he died, he would no longer be able to do this. The fairy, hearing this, asked if the guy was going to die right now. And then she also added that he should buy her ice cream when he returned. John smiled confidently and said that he understood everything. At this time, there was a little girl in the hospital ward. It was John's younger sister who decided to wash her hands after her cough. Suddenly there was a crash, and the nurses ran into her room looking frightened. They shouted for someone to call a doctor quickly, because the girl was getting worse. While lifting her up, the sisters tried to ask if everything was okay, but the girl did not answer. At this time, John was thinking that this forest was different from any he had ever seen, and he knew he had to be on the lookout for any signs of monsters. Suddenly, on one of the trees, he saw a lennox fruit. In his past life, he could not even imagine that they would grow here. These fruits are used in alchemy, but they are not rare, so John saw no point in stopping to collect them. However, if there are lennox fruits growing here, then there is also one fast monster. Since he was fast, John could get more experience from him. By pressing the button on the system, the guy decided to try to catch him. When he saw this monster, he realized that he was not wrong in his theory. John was glad that he wouldn't have to stop to make a profit. While he was running after her, he realized that in his current state, he wouldn't be able to keep up with this turbo rat, and he had to come up with something. Suddenly, a fairy jumped out and asked him what he thought about using the Itzania. John was surprised that the sphere could appear even in dungeons, but he continued to run. The fairy explained that she could not appear in ordinary dungeons. However, this is a secret dungeon, prepared especially for the guy. She asked if the guy really thought that she, as the manager of the forbidden restriction, couldn't get in here. Sphere explained her visit by saying that she was worried about John and decided that she had to help. Then the guy began to think that if his memory serves him right, Itzania is a carnivorous plant. The fairy explained that they try to eat everything that catches their eye. All the guy had to do was point the turbo rat at them and they would do all the work for him. After hearing all this, John decided that he had to try to do it. And so, after some time, John continued to run and thought that soon they would lose this monster. Suddenly, the fairy said that the Incensians were living right ahead and they should move forward. Suddenly, the monster ran out of fuel because there was no way to eat lennox fruits to replenish his strength. And now the beast was almost in John's hands, and the guy thought that everything was perfect. However, right above them was the incense, which had already opened its mouth. The fairy, seeing this, began to shout at the boy to be careful. But the monster closed its mouth along with the little animal and John. A moment later, the boy was able to get out of the monster's mouth and began to shake off his clothes. Sphere awkwardly asked if the guy was okay, but she was very worried. John wanted to take a break, but the monsters around him were against it, which made the guy very upset. The fairy said that they should change tactics and retreat. The guy, calmly fighting the monsters, said that there was no need for this. And all because John believed that now everything was completely different. And so John began to gather all his strength for the attack. He decided to use a technique called the Crimson Lotus Fireball. After he dealt with the monsters, looking at the statistics, the guy realized that he had reached level 20. The fairy told him that helping the boy turned out to be quite a difficult task. John replied that it seemed to him that the girl was only screaming somewhere behind his back. Then the sphere got completely angry and asked the guy again about what he had said. When the boy replied that he hadn't said anything, the fairy smiled and said that she hadn't heard anything either. Hearing this, John just smiled and thought that she was very loud. They've made a lot of progress since their first encounter with Turbo Rat. The fairy decided to ask who else was capable of something like this. After that, she also told the guy to make sure he collected all the dropped items. John decided to ask her if she thought there were a lot of rare quality items in the inventory. The fairy only replied that it was all perfectly logical. And then she added that there are quite a lot of chances of rare items dropping in secret dungeons. After that, they decided to take a look at the lizards, which could easily be sold and earn several million. Hearing this, John was shocked at how much this thing cost. He was shocked because if he continued to go into these dungeons, he would become a millionaire in no time. And then he finally decided that next time he would just have to go to a dungeon of a higher rank. Then the fairy said that the guy had better not forget that there was a huge difference between these ranks. Suddenly, a dark aura overtook them, and John realized that they had no time to relax and chat. The fairy shouted that this was the boss of this secret dungeon. The recommended level for fighting this monster was as much as 150. Of course, he was very tall, but John said the monster would make a great handicap. The sphere began to scream that they had already reached their goal, and that it was not worth taking such risks. John said that defeating this monster would be the shortest way to help his little sister. And then he also added that the Naga is nothing more than a source of experience. The monster's skin has a special feature that can absorb magic, and these creatures are known as the sworn enemies of magicians. John understood that everything would be fine as long as he could use physical attacks. Attacking the monster with his sword, he realized that he was unable to cut through her thick skin. After the monster's attack, the ground began to melt and the fairy panicked even more. John realized that she could melt anything, so if he touched her, the guy would die immediately. And then he realized that if he was hit by any of the monster's attacks, he would most likely die. With a smile on his face, John said that he hadn't been this nervous in a long time and began his attacks. Thanks to the forbidden restriction, he could store and retrieve items from a separate dimension. At that moment, the fairy said that the guy had almost completely mastered part of the forbidden limitation that she had taught him. John, however, tried his best to deal with the Naga, although it was very risky. He thought that given the difference in their characteristics, the guy wouldn't even be able to hurt her. The fairy saw the monster approaching and began to shout to John that she was coming. The guy repelled the attack, but the monster was able to break his axe. John realized that it looked like any weapon he had would do nothing. After this, a dangerous plan came into his head, which he decided to put into action. The guy started using a sonic boom, aiming straight at the snake's mouth. This was followed by a technique called the Crimson Lotus Fireball. The monster was not afraid of magic, and this would only replenish his strength. However, the guy had a plan, which was that there should be a limit to the amount of magic a monster could absorb. If the guy can overcome him, she'll be in trouble. John knew that since the forbidden restriction allowed him to use the spell, then he would use it. The guy began to furiously attack the monster with his fireballs without stopping. John knew that using so many spells in such a short period of time would put a lot of strain on his body. However, he also understood that this pain was nothing compared to what his little sister was experiencing. And so, after some time, out of breath, the guy began to think that, most likely, he had surpassed the monster. The fairy shouted to the guy that he could handle it, and there was only a little time left. And now, finally, John was able to defeat this terrible monster. His level was immediately increased, but the guy felt terrible. He also received the poisoned blade that belonged to that monster, and seeing it, he even smiled. The fairy began to ask if the guy was okay, to which he replied that everything was fine, but only a miracle saved him. After that, the sphere praised the guy for his excellent work and smiled. She said that John could rest because he had defeated the boss, which meant that he would soon be automatically teleported outside. However, at this moment John had already lost consciousness and did not hear her. The fairy decided to help the guy, but she entered the wrong coordinates, and they returned to the wrong house. Suddenly she heard footsteps and realized that someone was coming. After apologizing to the guy 1,000 times, she disappeared so that no one would see her. At that moment, Jessie came out of the corner and looked at the guy in surprise. Realizing it was John, she cried out in horror and turned pale. After some time, John woke up in bed, but the apartment was not his. Jessie was rushing around the room and was glad that the guy had finally woken up. And then she said that she was very worried. John, collecting his thoughts, realized that this was the girl's room. She said that she was walking down the street and saw a guy lying unconscious and decided to take him away. Then he sat down on the bed and said that the girl had saved his life, after which he thanked her. Jessie started saying that she didn't need thanks, because the most important thing was that he was okay. After that, she asked why the guy was unconscious in that place. John decided that it was not worth mentioning about the secret dungeon, and told about going to a high-ranking dungeon alone. Hearing this, Jessie exclaimed in surprise, and then said that she was glad that the guy was still alive. John once again thanked the girl for saving him and for taking him in. She also said that there have been many incidents involving awakened people lately. After that, she pointed to where the guy's things were and said that his phone was broken. Jessie, standing at the door, asked if the guy was hungry, because she had cooked porridge. John asked in surprise if he could eat, and the girl, of course, allowed it. After this, Jessie also said that she never paid the guy for saving her in that dungeon. The guy started getting out of bed and saying that he told her not to worry about it. After that, she happily ran away, saying that she would bring the porridge right away. John smiled and thought that this girl was very kind. Suddenly, the guy noticed items of clothing sticking out of the closet and immediately closed his eyes. The girl saw that the guy was looking at her closet and decided to take a look at what was there. After that, Jessie asked, embarrassed, if he had seen what was there. John became embarrassed, and then the girl realized that the guy had managed to notice this item of clothing. After she began to confirm what he saw, the guy finally agreed with her. And now Jessie was sitting there and was completely broken by what had happened, and the guy didn't know how to apologize. After this, the girl said that it was her own fault that she had not cleaned up well. After some time, the girl handed the guy coffee and told him to eat it before it got cold. She also asked to forget about what happened and just eat. John just thought that, of course, he wouldn't be able to tell her this, but such a memory would settle in his head for a long time. After this, the guy thanked for the food and began his meal. After trying the porridge, the guy realized how delicate its taste was. Jessie only replied that the secret ingredient was ginger, and when she was sick as a child, she often asked her mother to make this porridge. While eating the porridge, John said that it turned out to be the girl's family's secret recipe. And after that, the guy asked if she lived separately from her parents. Jessie replied that her parents died in a monster attack 7 years ago. As she said this, a picture of her father being torn away from her mother and shoved into the monster's mouth immediately flashed in her mind. John, noticing her downcast gaze, realized that he had stirred up unpleasant memories. The girl replied that it happened a long time ago and she was no longer worried about it. The guy then asked if that was the reason she wanted to become an adventurer. Jessie replied that perhaps, but she wanted as many people as possible to avoid the same fate. However, besides this, she wanted to become one since childhood, to be amazing and cool. Smiling, the girl said that this was why she tried to force the guy to take her as a student. Jessie knew that for her own sake, she wanted to give it her all. John realized that the girl would definitely continue to try to become an adventurer, no matter what difficulties she faced along the way. Instead of acting in her own self-interest, she tried to act based on her convictions. After that, John began to thank the girl, but she did not understand what the guy was doing. He began to say that he had said that she was not fit to be an adventurer that time, and he wished he could take those words back now. After this, John asked her if she would like to become his student. Jessie was simply stunned with shock and did not understand what the guy meant. Then John said that the most important thing for an adventurer is not strength or talent, but courage. And since the girl was so brave, the guy wanted to help her. He also said that he was busy at the moment, so it would take him some time before he could start training her. After these words, Jessie began to thank the guy and bow to him. She started crying and said that if the guy was really happy with someone like her, then she would really like to become his student. John also said that he would definitely make a first-class sorceress out of her. In the end, the girl thanked the guy for everything he said and did for her. She also added with a smile that she was looking forward to the start of their work together. So, after some time, John reasoned that he ended up getting a lot of different things. The guy decided to sell one thing that he didn't need. He decided to leave the rest of the items and use them. John also thought that the weapon he used to fight the monster was already broken, and he was lucky that he got a rare item. Suddenly, a fairy appeared next to him and asked what she looked like with a huge ice cream. After that, looking at his statistics, the sphere added that there is a long way to go, but the guy's growth rate amazes her. She also praised him for the way he distributes his skill points. John smiled sweetly and thanked her, and then asked how much he would get for selling the loot. When he saw the price tag, the guy realized that his goal of 500 million was already very close. Suddenly, John's phone rang, and the boy was surprised at how quickly it was fixed. Suddenly, he saw that his sister's doctor was calling him, and he gently picked up the phone. He began to excitedly greet and say his name. The man on the phone said that they had finally reached him because the girl's recent condition had suddenly worsened. At this rate, the doctor was afraid she had very little time left. He also thought it would be better if the guy was next to her while she was still conscious. Then John asked to give the phone to his little sister. When she had the phone, the guy started saying that it was her older brother, and then asked if she could talk to him now. The girl said with a heavy sigh and a hoarse voice that she could, and the guy understood how hard it was for her. The little girl started calling for her brother, and her condition was worse than ever. At that moment, John said that he had found a way to cure her. Then the doctor intervened and said that it was not worth making rash decisions. The girl didn't care what the doctor said, and she only said hopefully that she would wait for her brother. John thanked his sister and said that there was only a little bit left. After that, he asked the fairy if she thought he could earn the entire amount if he cleared the highest-ranked secret dungeon. The sphere replied that it was possible, but it would most likely look like suicide. John just said that he had to do it and started looking for the secret dungeon with the highest rank. He didn't think at all that it would be difficult to challenge the highest-ranked dungeon with average stats. The fairy shouted that the guy would never be able to clear this dungeon, and that he shouldn't take such risks. After that, she asked if the guy would go there. When he said that he naturally had to do this, the sphere said that it would help him in any way it could. John thanked the little girl for her care, and together they went into this secret dungeon. When they were inside this dungeon, it looked very frightening and incomprehensible. The fairy began to say that the guy would clear the dungeon by going through 5 floors of the tower and defeating the boss on the last floor. Hearing this, John realized that they had a long job ahead of them. The sphere also said that there were safe areas in the tower where the monsters would not be able to detect him. However, first John will have to defeat the White Lion of Nia. Now the guy was at level 70, and to defeat the monster he needed level 320. Hearing this, John began to think, but the fairy asked if the guy would be able to defeat him. He then replied that it was just one high-ranking monster, and he would be able to defeat it even with his eyes closed. John realized that he first needed to defeat the monsters and get rare drops. At that moment, Leo jumped right at the guy and began to roar loudly. John hoped they would fight at close range, and all because he used his precious skill points to unlock this particular skill. He had a spell that caused a significant increase in physical abilities, and while it was in effect, the person was covered in highly concentrated mana. John knew that because of the forbidden limitation, he would be able to use it for 0 OM. In short, the guy could use it without restrictions, despite its current characteristics. However, he shouldn't overtax his body with continuous use of magic. Suddenly, a special quest appeared in front of him, which surprised John very much. At that moment, a fairy jumped out and said that special quests were a chance for rapid growth. Trying to read the quest, the guy tried to understand how to complete it. It was a little different from the call he knew. A familiar would greatly enhance John's fighting potential. In the end, it turned out that the guy had to tame this lion for himself. John was sad that he would have to change his strategy, but there was nothing he could do. In a matter of seconds, he used his strength and put the lion on the ground. However, Leo had used wind armor, and it wouldn't be that easy to deal damage. The fairy started shouting at the guy that now was not the time to talk about anything and play the fool. John told her not to worry, because in order to subdue this beast, he had to show him how big the difference in their strength was. The sphere only said that the boy was fighting a high-ranking monster, and then asked if he thought it was impossible. John then replied that the beasts had quite fearsome attacks, but the sequence of their attacks was quite simple. Besides, it seemed to the guy that with the help of this beast, he would be able to clear this dungeon much faster. John realized that he had to make the beast his own for sure. After this, the guy approached the animal's face and asked for forgiveness one last time. It turned out that during this time, the guy had tracked the sequence, and so the monster now knew everything in advance. After numerous attacks, John asked the lion again if he heard him. When the lion began to attack again, John used all his strength and began to hit the beast in the face with all his speed. The boy tried his best to make the lion bow down before him. And so, after some time, the fairy was surprised that the guy actually managed to defeat a high-ranking monster. John told the lion that he had better listen to him this time and lie down. Sphere was shocked that the monster obeyed him so easily. Since the guy was able to tame the beast, the quest was completed, and the guy received summoning magic for it. John was surprised that after fixing the monster, he received experience and loot. Then the fairy explained that the guy had turned the enemy from the dungeon into his familiar, so the reward was well deserved. She also noted that he had completed a special quest that was much more difficult than simply defeating a monster. At this point, John noticed that he had gained 50 levels. After this, he asked the sphere if it knew what was on each floor of the tower. When she answered in the affirmative, John turned to her with a smile and said that he was counting on her help. The fairy became embarrassed and declared that she refused to take on such responsibility. John was surprised, and then the sphere asked him to ask for help properly. He called her the sweetest and most angelic fairy and began to beg for support. The sphere reported that hordes of second-tier undead were roaming the first floor. Their numbers and combined power make this place more dangerous than a normal Tier 3 dungeon. John then wondered which spell would be most useful on this floor. After seeing some of the spells, the fairy asked the boy if they seemed too complicated. She recommended against using some of them, considering them ineffective. John countered that all the spells he had unlocked were irreplaceable and would help turn enemies into experience. Sphere asked again in surprise, not believing his words. John urged her to trust him and get comfortable. Taking one last look at the tower, he decided it was time to enter. Suddenly, the sphere remembered that it had forgotten to tell him something important. Once he enters the dungeon, he will not be able to leave until he reaches the core on the top floor. When John stated that he didn't care, the sphere noted that he really wasn't afraid for his life. John replied that this was not so, but he was much more afraid for his sister's life than for his own. Hearing this, the sphere began to mock him using unflattering words, but the boy did not react. He saw the seals on the door and realized that they were now locked inside. At that moment, the fairy warned him to be careful, as the undead were approaching right towards them. Then John decided that before the battle began, he needed to use his new spell. The spell was called Concealment and allowed him to completely hide his location. Now that the boy was completely hidden, he was able to calmly summon his new pet. John ordered him to run across the entire floor so that all the undead would target him. The guy reasoned that the undead themselves are quite powerful monsters, but since they are dead, they lack any intelligence. Therefore, the monsters will pursue the beast until its death. After the beast ran past the monsters, John ordered it to run to the center and wait. Fisher mused that the Petrify spell was rather difficult to cast. She thought its value for money was terrible. However, now that all the undead had gathered in one place, the boy only needed to cast this spell on his sword. After that, he began to enchant the undead, and a bright light illuminated the entire floor of the tower. At that moment, the fairy realized that by adding holy enchantment to the demonic sword, the boy gained the ability to use holy magic. In just a couple of minutes, John was done with the undead and declared the extermination complete. After that, he stroked his lion and said that he had done a great job. The fairy was shocked that the guy actually dealt with the monsters in just a couple of minutes. Then John asked her if she believed in him, and the fairy began to scream that she still needed to be convinced of it by seeing everything with her own eyes. At that moment, the system doubled the guy's level, which surprised him greatly. He also got a lot of different items of a fairly high rank, which also made the guy happy. Then John decided to ask if this would be enough to earn 500 million, and the sphere began to calculate. After calculating, it turned out that all the things sold would cost even more than this amount, and then John decided to finish. Then the fairy reminded him that she had warned the boy that they would not be able to leave this tower until he had overcome the island on each floor and reached the top floor. Then John pointed his finger up and asked her to look up. Looking up, she saw an ordinary ceiling and couldn't understand what the guy was getting at. The fairy became angry and began to shout at him to get to the point. John said that this ceiling does not have seals like on the walls and doors. This meant that they could break through it and easily reach the top floor. The fairy started shouting that it was a waste of time in a high-ranking dungeon and asked the guy to be patient. John said that now that he had collected enough money to save his sister, he no longer needed this place. And so they found themselves on the very top floor, where the boss, who controlled all the undead in this tower, was waiting for them. The sphere began to tell the boy that in his current state he would not be able to defeat the monster. But she understood that common sense did not apply to him. So she decided not to stop him and let him hurry to save his little sister. Then John turned around with a smile and thanked the sphere. The guy was sure that since it was the Grim Reaper, he would use ghost magic. So he decided to use one of his forbidden spells. John was convinced that with its help he would be able to completely suppress the monster. He was also glad that he had finally found a shortcut to the top floor. The sphere told the guy to be careful, because the monster could attack them at any moment. John replied that with this equipment, he could afford to relax his vigilance. The guy understood perfectly well that in order to defeat the boss in his current state, he simply had to prevent him from using his techniques. At this point, John began to use the perception block, and his entire body became covered in a dull green color. Using ghostly magic, the Reaper causes the undead to attack his enemies. However, if the boy uses the perception block, the undead will consider him to be an undead as well, making the Reaper's magic completely useless. In his past life, John fought the Grim Reapers many times. That's why the guy knew all his actions in advance. John began using the Magic Eye of Wisdom in its first form. He was glad that he had finally reached the skill tree, which had been his strong point in the past. The Magic Eye of Wisdom was one of the highest ranked magic eyes, but he could only use it in its first form. This first form allowed him to see the opponent's mana. However, since the monster often disappeared without a trace, It was extremely difficult to hit. John knew that if he could see the enemy's mana, he would be able to determine his location. At that moment, the guy aimed as hard as he could and began to launch his attack at the monster. John was able to hit him, but most likely this attack did not cause much damage to the boss. In this case, the guy decided that he needed to beat the monster again and again until it died. Even with his current weak status, John was able to counter the enemy's techniques using the first form of the magic eye of wisdom. The guy forgot to take into account one important thing: the huge difference between his past self and his present self. The enemy exploited his emotional vulnerability, which he did not have in the past. John struggled to get out and screamed his sister's name, and again a new blow followed after the illusionary magic. He understood perfectly well that he could not dodge the enemy's attacks in such a state. The guy started to get very angry and think about what to do. John remembered the moments with his little sister and realized that he couldn't die here. In one of her memories, my sister said that she had learned a minute of one waltz and smiled happily. Then John stroked her head and said that she was a good girl. The girl's life flashed before her eyes, and her little sister completely lost hope. The little girl understood that they were truly happy then. At that moment, my little sister was saying that she was playing the piano better and better every day. John didn't know if his body had really given up, and tears were welling up in his eyes. At that moment, the guy began to remember the past and said that he did not want to die. John couldn't figure out what this was all about, because the system was asking if he wanted to remove the forbidden restrictions. At this time, a system appeared in front of him, and the fairy asked if this thing had always been above his head. The guy understood perfectly well that all this was done in order not to lose his little sister. John shouted that he would do anything for this. At that moment, he fought the monster with all his might, and sparks flew in all directions. He really wanted to get back to his little sister as quickly as possible. The guy was so angry that he swore he would smash the entire dungeon to pieces. John prayed to the gods that he would get everything done in time. At this point, the nurse shouted at the girl to hold on and said that she would call her brother now. The nurse screamed at the top of her lungs and begged the boy to come here as soon as possible. She couldn't understand what he was doing at such an hour, and John was running as fast as he could at that moment. He knew he was running as fast as he could and hoped he would make it. At that moment, the nurse was holding the girl's hand and thinking about her. The woman realized that her condition was rapidly deteriorating. After that, she thought that at least they would let her leave in peace. At that moment, John burst into the office and shouted her name loudly. Then the doctor said that the girl was already unconscious. After that, he asked to stay with her until the very end, and John at that moment was glad that he had made it. The guy walked towards her bed, and the doctor said that he could still feel the warmth of her body. Then John picked up the girl and began to say that he had made it. The doctor started shouting about what the guy was doing because he started to take off his mask. However, John began to pour the elixir obtained after the battle and use it on his sister. After he applied it, he began to look with hope that the baby would wake up. Suddenly she opened her eyes but was still very weak. The doctors, seeing this, could not understand what was happening and were shocked. Opening her eyes fully, the little sister said her brother's name. After that, John hugged the girl tightly because he was incredibly happy that he had made it. And that same night, the doctor said that at the moment his sister was in perfect health and had no problems. He also thought that it was safe to say that there would be no relapse. Therefore, the doctors decided together that the girl could be discharged tomorrow, which made John very happy. However, the man still could not believe that she had gotten rid of an incurable disease by taking just one dose of medicine. Then John explained that it was a magical drug called an elixir that he found in the dungeon. This surprised the doctor very much, because something similar was found in the dungeon. After this, the man also asked whether such places were really extremely mysterious. The very next day, John was leaving the hospital with his little sister. The girl was glad that the air outside was very fresh. Then John smiled and said that the girl seemed to be doing well. Then the little girl replied that it even seemed to her that all this pain was not real. Suddenly John started calling for a taxi, and then the girl said that she didn't want to ride in it. She decided that since she had already recovered, she wanted to walk home. John then asked her if she knew that their house was quite far from here, and asked if she was sure of her decision, since she had recently recovered. The girl replied that everything was fine, and if something happened, John would simply carry her on his back. John smiled and asked if he could talk the girl out of it, knowing that she would still do it her way. When the boy said that they would go on foot, the girl became even happier and grabbed her brother's hand tightly. As they walked, John asked the girl what she wanted for dinner. The little girl replied that she wanted her brother to cook his curry for her. John said that she didn't have to worry about money, and that she could choose whatever she wanted. The girl replied that that was not the issue at all, and that she just wanted to eat the food her brother had prepared. John smiled and said that then they would need to stop by the supermarket. The girl exclaimed joyfully that she would need to buy some pudding. And so, after some time, they came home, and the little sister screamed that she hadn't been home for a long time. Suddenly, she saw a light burning from one of the rooms, and thought about it. John, seeing this, suddenly remembered that there was a sphere there. He moved sharply towards his sister and shouted at her not to enter the room. However, the girl had already managed to enter and saw the fairy relaxing in the bathroom. She said that the fast food of this world is just wonderful, and she is becoming addicted to it. The girl came closer and asked in surprise if it was a fairy. Sphere, unsuspecting, said that she was glad that the girl had recovered. After this, the sphere also asked not to call her a fairy anymore, since her name is a sphere. She also said that she had helped John countless times. At that moment, the little girl turned around and realized that it was all true. She leaned towards the sphere and thanked it with all her heart for taking care of her older brother. Then the sphere said that, unlike John, the girl is a very well-mannered person. The little girl laughed shyly, and a blush appeared on her face. John watched what was happening and thought that perhaps it was for the best. Then John looked at the ingredients and realized it was time to make the curry. After a while, everyone was sitting at the table and wishing each other bon appetit. The girl was delighted when she tried the curry prepared by John. She was glad to finally eat her brother's curry after a long time. John told her that his efforts had paid off. The girl exclaimed that she felt alive again, surprising her brother. The fairy said that the girl almost died, and it is not surprising that she feels alive. The girl smiled and said that the sphere was absolutely right. John heard this and could not understand how the fairy dared to say such a thing, but he was reassured by the fact that his little sister was laughing. At that moment, an urgent statement was announced on TV, and John looked at it in surprise. The TV presenter reported that a huge dungeon had appeared in the metro area, and the Adventurers Guild declared that it was a top-ranking dungeon. At this point, my sister said that more and more dungeons have been appearing lately. John reasoned that this was a high-ranking dungeon, and it would take a long time to clear it. Suddenly, a system appeared in front of him, and John looked at it in surprise. It turned out that the system had given him a quest, exactly the same as last time. Sphere said that quests with a time limit should not exist. But this quest is important because it is called compensation for removing the limit. John realized that he would now have to complete this quest, since during the last fight, he had removed all restrictions. The little girl, seeing her brother's anxious face, awkwardly asked what was going on. At this point, John realized that his little sister couldn't see anything, and apologized for possibly saying something strange. After this, John suggested continuing the meal, and the girl awkwardly agreed. That evening, John sat on the sofa and thought about how even the Great Sphere didn't know what was going on. The fairy felt that it was highly likely due to John's transformation in the battle with the Grim Reaper. This did not surprise the sphere at all, since it controlled prohibitions and restrictions. Then the fairy cried out that this was the first time she had heard of the forbidden release, and clarified that only John could know what was happening. John was upset by this, but he expressed his guess. The sphere looked at the guy in surprise and asked if he had an idea. The system showed that the quest was very difficult, and John was convinced of his words. John said he was absolutely certain it was due to his transformation in the battle with the Grim Reaper. He added that most likely the lifting of restrictions was a protective function of the prohibitive restriction. John pointed out that it was supposed to go off when his life was in danger. For the spell to work, he requires an equivalent amount of energy. But during the battle with the Grim Reaper, when he removed the restrictions, he did not need to pay compensation. The fairy listened to all this and did not understand what was happening. John explained that this meant that in exchange for being saved in the battle with the Grim Reaper, he must pay compensation under any circumstances. Sphere realized that this is why the quest is called compensation for removing the restriction. John added that there was still a lot he didn't understand. Suddenly, the fairy screamed and asked if the guy had called it a deferred payment. She added that if John did not pay, that is, did not complete this urgent quest, he would most likely die. The sphere screamed in alarm that they needed to hurry, and most likely this was the same dungeon that was talked about on TV. John said he agreed, but he didn't like it. He realized that his adventures as an adventurer continued. In the morning, the little sister got ready and, saying goodbye to her brother, said that she was going to school. John saw her off with a smile and wished her a good day. Then he decided to go to the office to discuss some business. At the office, the girl asked John if he was sure he wanted to take the exam to advance to the highest level. The guy answered with confidence in his eyes that he was completely ready for this. When the girls walked away, they discussed how, from time to time, unprofessional people come here and ask to pass exams that are not suitable for them in order to get promoted. John heard their conversation perfectly well but said nothing. The Crystal Mines is a large, high-ranking dungeon that suddenly appeared in the metro area. Due to being run by the Adventurers Guild, this dungeon is a normal dungeon rather than a secret one. However, to do this, John will need to increase his own rank because he has only been to the secret dungeons, and his rank clearly indicates a lack of achievements. To pass the exam for a high rank, he will have to pass the measurement of characteristics, as well as a practical exam. John, realizing what he needed, touched the glowing ball to measure the characteristics. Seeing the level 240, the girl was shocked, because she did not understand how this person could reach such a level. When John saw her shock, he asked what happened, but the girl replied that everything was fine. She said she would call John when the practical exam began, and he calmly walked outside. Suddenly he heard shouts and thought that there was a quarrel going on somewhere. The boy told the man that he was not the only one responsible for their failure to clear the dungeon. The man said that they screwed up precisely because the boy's skill was useless. The guy replied that he could accept that he would only get a small portion of the spoils, but he would not take the blame for the clan's failure. The man replied that they were unable to clear the dungeon only because of his short-sightedness. He also said the guy was just trying to shift the blame by punching the ground. While swinging at the boy, the man continued to shout that it was no wonder the child was expelled. At that moment, John blocked the man's blow, thereby saving the boy. The man asked arrogantly who he was. John replied that he was just an adventurer passing by. Then the man said that strangers should not interfere in other people's affairs. At that moment, the loudspeakers announced that a high-ranking adventurer needed to go to the reception. As he left, he said he would just pretend nothing had happened and advised the boys to consider themselves lucky. Then he turned angrily and noted that it would not last long. The kid began to apologize to John for having to intervene. The guy asked what happened between them, but the boy immediately panicked. He explained that the man was the leader of the Red Dragon clan, of which he was a member. The boy's name was Pete, and when he was with the team, they didn't want to clear a high-level dungeon. However, they ran into a trap in which everyone died except Frank, that is the man, and Pete. The blame should have fallen on Frank, since he is the leader of the team, but the man tried to blame everything on the baby. After hearing all this, John said that the boy's story sounded terrible. At that moment, they started calling him, and he began to say goodbye to the boy. Pete suddenly shouted that the practical exam was a demonstration fight against high-ranking adventurers. He began to warn that the man was indeed dangerous, and every time he acted as an examiner, his opponents suffered terrible injuries. Then John said that everything was fine, and although you wouldn't know it from looking at him, he was quite strong. The kid just looked at John with concern as he said goodbye. After some time, John was in the examination hall, and Frank, seeing him, laughed loudly. He warned the boy not to think that he would be able to get out of here unharmed. However, John responded without hesitation that he was also glad that the man had become his opponent, which confused him. He then added that with such a terrible person he could not hold back. And then the loudspeakers announced that the practical exam was beginning. At that very moment, Frank rushed at John and told him to try not to die from one blow. When the boy dodged, he saw that the man had split the ground with his bare hands. John realized that the man had very high characteristics for a high rank. When the guy started to move away, Frank put his hands out and shouted that he wasn't leaving. At this point, the man began to use gravity, which greatly surprised John, as he could no longer control his movements. The man swung at the guy who was flying straight at him and screamed that it was the end. However, John was able to dodge the blow again and stand firmly on his feet. Frank started to say that the guy had dodged it pretty well, but he was just lucky. John said that this attraction skill suits the man's physical characteristics well. Frank began to say that the guy was very smart, and if he hadn't been so impudent, the man would have invited him to his clan. However, according to the man, because of the guy's insolence, his career as an adventurer will end today. John continued to stand there and reasoned that the man had a large amount of mana, as expected from a high rank. After more techniques, Frank said that the guy's strength could become a big problem for his clan in the future. And then he added that he was very lucky to destroy the guy in the initial stages. Then John took a fighting stance and said that the man's luck was about to run out. Frank just laughed and said he would see how long the boy could maintain his insolence. At that moment, John felt a very strong heaviness in his body and could not understand what to do. After another reception, the guy began to reason that the man uses his skills well, and in addition, he has first-class power. John realized he would have to use his wisdom eye to block Frank's technique, and his man again began to use the power of attraction and call the guy to him. At that moment, John put his hand forward and began to use all his strength. Frank was shocked that the guy was able to break his gravity. He immediately realized that the guy was truly an unusual and competent person. Suddenly, John started to walk away and the man started yelling at him that their match wasn't over yet. Then the guy turned around and asked if the man had heard the announcer. Frank was angry and didn't understand what was going on. So he started yelling that he didn't care, and they weren't finished yet. John then said that he came here to become a high-ranking adventurer, and he only cared about passing the practical exam. At this point, the man became even more angry, and started shouting at the guy not to joke with him. Frank slammed his fists on the ground and said that he would get to the boy one day. And then he also shouted that they would definitely finish their fight. At this time, the girl handed John a gold card and congratulated him on his promotion to the highest rank. While the guy was thanking him for his concern, Pete came up and asked how everything went. Then John said that he somehow managed and was glad that the exam was quite short. The boy let out a calm breath and said that he had seen enough adventurers who had successfully suffered terrible injuries in that short time. And then he also praised the guy for not having a single scratch on him. Then John said that he felt he was strong enough to be considered a high-ranking adventurer. Then Pete said that Frank was famous for his stubbornness and might come after the guy. Eventually, the boy told John to contact him if he had any problems. John walked down the street, thinking that he was now of high rank, but still didn't know how to join the clan. He knew he could always ask old friends about it. Suddenly, John saw a monster nearby. A crowd of people immediately started running towards the guy, shouting that they would soon be killed. Roma was telling or starting to tell people that monsters had broken out of the gate and all people were asked to evacuate immediately. John only became angry when he heard this because he had just started making plans. The guy understood that he would feel uneasy if he ignored what was happening and people died. After a short search, John found the monster. He was tired and wanted to deal with it as soon as possible so he could continue his business. At this time, one of the men was in an authorized viewing room with monitors. He was surprised that John was so weak, but somehow managed to reach a high level in a short period of time. Watching John, the man realized that the guy was incompetent and lacking in skills, but had significantly exceeded his limits. He decided to simply report this to the guild leadership for now. At this time, another guy was holding a sword in his hands and was amazed at the strength of the enemy. At that moment, the man who was on his side helped him deal with this enemy. This clan continued to fight, and one of them began to use the powers of a wind cannon. After that, the guy turned around and said to give him the boss. The clan immediately said that they couldn't stand this guy, but he was the strongest of them all. Then the guy started telling the monster that the snake had no chance against him. The fight continued, and the clan divided itself into enemies that were of a suitable level. At this time, John was sitting on the roof of one of the buildings and simply watching the fight. He was unsure, but if he intervened right now, he would be accused of stealing the boy's loot. John understood that the guy was only one rank below him, so he decided to trust him. This guy thought that if he defeated the monster, he would immediately be promoted to a high rank and would not have to take the exam. After that, he smiled and said that becoming an adventurer would be easy. John watched the guy and realized that he was just talking. He clearly didn't notice that the boss had been building up his strength all this time. At that moment, the monster broke free from the trap and looked straight at the guy. At this point, John realized that the guy really wasn't using his brain and started to approach them. At that moment, the guy screamed in fear and asked the monster not to come near him. The boss was getting closer and closer and his mouth was opening wider and wider. At that moment, John stood between the monster and the guy and pulled out his sword. He took out the boss with one hit and the guys didn't ask if he saved him. Later, the leader of the crowd said that John was able to defeat everyone with one blow. The guy realized that in the end it would look like he had stolen their loot, and he decided to quickly get out of there before they started yelling at him. The men of the clan still couldn't figure out what was wrong with this adventurer, John. It was clear to everyone that the guy was on a whole new level. At this point, one girl was happy that she had managed to take some great photos. She looked at her phone and admired John's skill with the sword. Besides, John was also handsome, so the girl was lucky to take these pictures. She sat in the cafe and continued to think about John's rank. The girl even thought that perhaps the guy had not yet joined the clan and tried to find him in the database. It turned out that it was indeed John, and he was still incompetent despite his incredible strength. The girl realized that all this could be quite interesting, and it made her happy. In the evening, when John returned home, he immediately heard his sister scream. He started saying that it was quite rude to use a smartphone while eating. Then his sister showed him the phone screen and told him to be sure to look at it. John picked up the phone and began to examine what was on it. To his surprise, it was himself on the video. His sister told him that the man in the video was John and asked if the guy was really that strong. John replied that it was indeed him, but he did not understand who could have photographed him. Then the sister asked if he knew Sarah. The girl explained that despite her fame, she was super strong. John immediately understood what was going on and looked thoughtfully at the fairy. Sphere said she offended the guy by calling him cool, and it seems he became quite popular. The sister started shouting that now her brother would also become a real celebrity. As soon as John noticed a bunch of notifications on his phone, he realized that the video had already been circulated. My sister said it was obvious because Sarah herself posted it. John decided to contact the site to have them remove the video. The guy understood that if people started spreading personal information, the jokes would be bad. At that point, the sister said that they needed to force Sarah to delete the video, and John just thanked the Almighty for such an understanding sister. Sfera supported the idea and said that large companies usually move slowly. She added that she was well versed in the matter because she had recently been collecting information from all over the internet. The sister said that the fairy was hardworking, but John thought that the sphere was just killing time. The guy suggested creating an account and contacting Sarah. The sister suggested that Sarah might not read the message because of the many notifications. John agreed with his sister. Suddenly the guy received a message, and the girl said that the worries were in vain because Sarah had already answered. My sister suggested skipping school tomorrow and going with my brother. John said that he understood the girl's feelings, but she shouldn't skip school. However, the guy was still bothered by the fact that Sarah responded too quickly, as if she was waiting for his message. The next day, John approached the Adventurers Guild. Suddenly, a girl grabbed him by the sleeve and asked him to follow her. John obeyed calmly, and they went up in the elevator. In one of the offices, the girl took off her hat and said that she was glad to meet John. The guy decided to immediately ask what kind of room it was. Sarah explained that it was a regular conference room, and added that if John had a high rank, he could use it at any time. Then she sat down on a chair, and said that because of her fame, she would not be able to have a heart-to-heart talk with him in front of everyone. John immediately understood why the girl brought him here. The guy decided to get down to business and asked if Sarah could delete the video. She replied that she had already deleted the post and showed it on her phone. Seeing this, John said that he felt much better and thanked the girl. Sarah said there was no need to thank her because it was nothing special. She did delete the video, but asked the guy if it seemed too wasteful given the amount of feedback he was getting. Sarah asked John if he dreamed of becoming famous. John sat down calmly on the chair and said that his views were completely different. Sarah realized that John definitely didn't want to stand out, but she wasn't going to insist. The girl just decided to ask if the guy would agree to continue working together. John asked the girl again in surprise, because he didn't understand what they were talking about. Sarah began to explain that John was strong after all, and that fact alone drew attention to him. John asked in surprise if Sarah had known before that he was incompetent. The girl then said that she posted the video either after she was looking for information about John. She began to boast that being famous was extremely useful, and also talk about how she planned to invite a guy with an unusual speech. John then asked if she had started the video to tell him about it. Sarah just said that she never does anything without a reason. She really wanted to create a group or even create a whole clan with her boyfriend. Then John asked where the girl got such a wild desire. Sarah simply responded that if she could attract the attention of people outside of social media, her popularity would certainly increase. After these words, John realized that there was nothing more important for the girl than being famous. Sarah winked and said he had hit the nail on the head. John began to discuss that he couldn't do without a clan, since he wanted to conquer a huge dungeon. After some discussion, the guy said that he was ready to consider their joint work, taking into account some conditions. John said he was interested in starting his own clan, which surprised Sarah. The girl only asked if the guy could not contain his stormy interest when such a cute girl was in front of him. After that, Sarah said that it would be difficult to create a clan with a person she knew nothing about, and suggested that she tell about herself. John said that he needed to clear a dungeon, and that's what he needed a clan for. Then Sarah asked if the guy was talking about the crystal mines, and John realized that she knew. Sarah thought that if John couldn't find the clan, he would try to clear the dungeon himself. She then suggested that they join forces. At this point, John said to wait a little, as he had other conditions. He would like the girl to promise not to post about him on social media without his permission. Sarah looked up and said she knew about it. She then added that she agreed with this condition. John said that that was all, and if the girl kept her promise, then he could also set his own conditions. Sarah extended her hand and said that in that case she looked forward to working together. John looked at her in surprise as she made a decision very quickly. Then the girl said that it was she who asked him to come here, and she felt that the guy had a bad impression of her. John calmly replied that his impressions were indeed not the best. Hearing this, Sarah said that this is why she wants to build a trusting relationship between them. John shook the girl's hand and asked if she could fulfill one more request. Then he handed over the piece of paper and said that he really wanted the girl to give an autograph to his little sister. Sarah opened the marker and said with a smile that he was a very good older brother. When the girl signed the paper and put on her cap, she said that to create a clan they needed to find 5 more people. John thought about it and decided to ask Sarah about her plans. The girl said with a smile that she had no one. Sarah started to say that everyone wanted to get close to her only because of her popularity. John said that he understood everything, and then he decided to invite his people himself. Sarah closed the door and called out to him to contact her when he was ready to continue. And now, at home, John's little sister was screaming with delight, having received an autograph from Sarah herself. The guy said he thought the girls would be pleased to receive it. John's little sister said that she loved her brother very much, and he became embarrassed. At that moment, the fairy appeared in front of John and laughed at him again. After some time, John's colleague replied that his wounds had not yet healed, and he would not be able to work as an adventurer in the near future. The girls he talked to said they could join their guild. There was only one person left, and John remembered the boy he had helped recently and decided to invite him. At this time, the little sister asked her brother about what they had talked about with Sarah. When John said that Sarah wanted to work together, the girl exclaimed in surprise and joy. Then John said he made her promise not to be popular. My sister said that they apparently got along well in private. The girl then said that she also wanted to meet Sarah alone, and John said that she might have such an opportunity. The little girl raised her hands up in delight and screamed that she was very happy about it. John knew he would do everything he could to ensure his sister could meet Sarah. However, given his current power level, he had trouble dealing with the dungeon boss. John realized that he needed to become even stronger. He also understood that this way of life would become his concept. At night, he decided to go to level up, and the fairy said that John was very hardworking. John said that during the day he has to work on creating a clan so he can only level up at night. The sphere understood that John was busy, but there was nothing to be done. His life was in danger. The sphere also warned John not to relax just because he managed to clear a high-ranking dungeon. Opening the ominous door, John said that he knew about it and was not going to relax. It was clear from the door that there were many strong monsters behind it. Upon entering the door, John immediately summoned his white Nemean lion. He gained experience for every monster he killed with his summons, and was thus able to level up more effectively. Apparently, the local monsters also loved to fight. It was thanks to this that John was able to increase his level, but much faster. The guy defeated monsters all night long, but did not give up. He did all this until only the boss remained. The main monster immediately threw Leo away from himself and touched himself. Then John looked at the animal and realized that it was time for him to rest. The guy said that the animal did everything it could, and so he decided to deal with the monster himself. After this, John turned to the boss and said that he had little time, so he would finish everything with one blow. At that very second, all the guy's power whirled around the terrible monster and tore it apart. The system immediately said that John had received the Club of Kings from this boss, and John breathed a sigh of relief. The power of one of the spells amazed the guy, but it seemed he was not yet strong enough to withstand its rebound. However, for now he is satisfied with this option, so he has come to terms with it. I'm already back, and was surprised that this time I found myself in the kitchen, and not in the backyard, as was the case last time. The sphere at that moment said that it was all because his coordinates in the dungeon had changed, and a lot of unnecessary things. He realized that the only dungeon he had been in was really the only one where he had moved around so much, and that was why he had ended up in the courtyard. He left his phone number and saw a message from a boy who said he wanted to know more details about the clan. Then the sphere said that if the guy managed to get this boy, he would become the 5th person needed to create the clan. John said that the boy had been to the crystal mines before, and if he could recruit him, he would be useful to them. After some time, they were already sitting and drinking tea in one of the establishments. The boy said he would be glad if John would let him join. Michael lifted his cup of tea to his mouth and asked if John had recruited the rest of the team. To this, John replied that besides him, the team had a couple of high-ranking adventurers and one adventurer of lower ranks. Michael was surprised because the difference in rank was big and asked if John knew these people, to which John replied that they only knew him, but he didn't think they knew each other. Michael replied that there would be 3 high-ranking adventurers with him, and they would attract a lot of attention. Then, becoming serious, he continued that sooner or later Frank would try to deal with them. Remembering the man, John looked closely at Michael and asked if he was sure about this, to which Michael replied that after the last meeting, Frank contacted him and asked him to tell him everything he knew about his interlocutor. And then he exclaimed that he hadn't told him anything. John, with a cup of tea, replied that he had really thought he would cause them a lot of trouble, and he added that this had been happening since he was his opponent in the promotion exam. But their squabbles don't concern Michael, because he is in no way responsible for it. Exhaling and raising the cup to his mouth, Michael thanked John. After all, he didn't want anyone else to go through this, and he also wants to be useful to the clan that John will lead. Michael admitted that he was fascinated by the guy's personality, which surprised him greatly. Placing his hands on his knees and bowing his head, He asked to be allowed to join his clan. John smiled, extended his hand and said that he couldn't wait to start working together. Michael shook John's hand in return and admitted that he couldn't wait for this moment. Walking on the roof, John thought that he had collected the necessary number of people to create a clan. Thinking and becoming serious, he thought that all that was left was to clear the dungeon. John remembered that for a high-ranking dungeon, the gates were emitting a large amount of mana, and Jessica and Catherine are not strong enough to go there yet. Remembering the girls, he decided that given the time to train them, they were barely making it. With anticipation, he decided that he would have to use a lot of unconventional methods. The next morning, the guy couldn't believe that he would be able to meet her so quickly. The girl turned around and shyly thanked her brother. John decided that now was the time, so he wrote to her. The girl was delighted that she had such a good brother. They slowly approached the tall building where the Adventurers Guild was located. Strangers looked at John walking and thought that he really did look like the guy from the video. The girl fell a little behind her brother and turned around, feeling that someone was looking at them intently. As John entered the elevator, he thought that although the video had not been online for long, people were already beginning to recognize it. Having climbed to the required floor, they approached a door behind which someone was already standing. Sarah, looking at John and her sister who was hiding behind him, was glad to see them. At this, the guy chuckled and noted that she got here first. Sarah smiled and looked at them, confirming this. At this time, the girl covered her mouth with her hands and exclaimed in surprise that she saw Sarah and that in life, she was much more beautiful. The girl was surprised that this cutie was there and assumed that she was his sister. Clutching her brother's hand, the girl was shocked when Sarah called her cutie. Lowering her glasses slightly, the girl was glad that Kitty was happy. The girl continued to look at Sarah in shock, because she couldn't believe that she remembered her name. The girl remarked that John must have fun having such an energetic sister, to which he laughed and said that she was a big fan of his. Michael appeared behind the guy and greeted everyone. John turned around and looked at him and noticed that he was punctual. And then he noticed Catherine, who also came up, to which the girl replied that she couldn't help but come because the guy invited her so politely. Jessica was the last to arrive and thanked John for his work. Afterwards, she said that she really hoped she hadn't kept them waiting. As the crowd looked at her, John told her not to worry, because they had just arrived themselves. Jessica breathed a sigh of relief because she'd been very worried about this. Then John said that since everyone was here, they needed to start their meeting by introducing themselves. They decided to start clockwise so as not to miss anyone. Then Kitty introduced herself and said that she was not an adventurer, but simply decided to keep her older brother company. At this point, Catherine asked John if this was the sister he was talking about. Everyone unanimously said that it was nice to meet the girl and noted her politeness. After that, Jessica introduced herself and said that she was a low-ranking adventurer, but she would give it her all. Next, Catherine introduced herself, saying that she was of a slightly higher rank and was good with a bow. After the girls, Michael introduced himself and said that he had support skills and would cover for them. At that moment, Sarah realized that she was the last one and panicked a little. At that moment, the girls said they were wondering who she looked like. Then Sarah took off her cap and said that perhaps someone knew her. After that, she introduced herself with a smile on her face and charm in her eyes. Everyone was shocked to see the real Sarah standing right in front of them. At this point, Catherine asked if Sarah had posted the video with John. Then the guy decided to discuss everything that happened. Then John told everyone what had happened in all the details, about how the girl accidentally ended up on the video, and how they contacted each other and created this plan, and also that their goal is to conquer the crystal mines. Upon hearing about these mines, Jessica said that this was the same dungeon that was recently discovered. John clarified that this was a huge, high-ranking dungeon, so entry was only open to clans. Upon hearing about the difficulty of the dungeon, Catherine said that it was too much of a challenge for her and Jessica. Jessica said with alarm that it was indeed very dangerous. John then said that this was why the clan's first priority would be to train them. Catherine said that there was no way they could become strong enough to fight equally in a high-ranking dungeon. Then Sarah came closer to the girls and said that, in her opinion, this could be achieved quite quickly. And then she clarified that John was able to achieve considerable success, jumping from a low rank straight to a high one. The girl was sure that everyone could become stronger literally in the blink of an eye. Then Catherine thoughtfully said that speed was completely unimportant, because it was simply impossible. John then said that Sarah was right, and they would all quickly become strong enough to compete with the high-ranking dungeon monsters. And then he also clarified that he could say with confidence that with his skill, this was entirely possible. Jessica was surprised to hear this, because the guy said he had no skills. John then apologized for not saying anything, but he did have a skill that only he could see. After that, sitting at the table, the guy began to talk about his hidden skill, Everyone was shocked that the guy had something like this all this time, which meant he couldn't be considered an ordinary incompetent. Jessica, watching the others, was surprised that everyone was taking the news so calmly. At this point, Kitty asked her brother about the skill in surprise. Then Jessica saw that the girl was surprised too, and realized that at least she was not alone. John looked at his little sister and asked her for forgiveness for not telling him earlier. The little girl then asked if the boy had used this hidden skill to heal her. As they spoke, Jessica only realized that Kitty's surprise was not as strong as hers. The girl began to understand that, apparently, it was because of his skill that she was able to use such amazing magic. At this point, Sarah began to ask John what kind of ability this was. The guy then replied that his skill allowed him to learn abilities from any skill group. Sarah laughed really hard and said that was the best skill ever. John then said that despite his strength, he has his weaknesses, and yet his hidden skill is indeed extremely useful. Then Catherine said that she didn't quite understand, but she knew from the beginning that the guy was quite strong. Michael, watching the girl's words, realized that she was incompetent. Then John said that it was precisely because the incompetent lacked skills that they were unable to use magic. Jessica asked the guy again in surprise, not understanding how this was different. John replied that magic was not what she thought it was. He explained that skills are actually a form of magic, but only the competent can use magic properly. John also said that Jessica had already used magic at least once. The girl confirmed this, but added that the guy made it so that she could use magic. John replied that he had just pushed her a little, and the spell had been strong enough. Michael continued to be surprised and said that it was all quite powerful. At this point, John said that such enormous power should be enough. That's why the guy was going to force Jessica to study magic. The girl heard this and said that she would do everything possible. After that, everyone asked about Catherine. John said he would give her a deeper understanding of his skill. He also added that all high-level adventurers should have a deeper understanding of all the nuances in their own skills. Sarah noted that John was right in that skills can change depending on how they are used. So John wanted Catherine to deepen her knowledge of her skill and said that they would raise her level. The girl just said in surprise that the guy's skill was really very unique. At this point, Sarah stood up from her chair and said that she could help too, because she could be useful when it came to advice on how to use skills. When the girl thanked her enthusiastically, John thought she got a different reaction. And after some time, the guy said that this is how they plan to make them stronger. After this, John asked Jessica if she was free now, because he would like to teach her the basics of magic right away. Then my sister and Catherine were surprised and asked to be present at this lesson too. John just smiled and said he didn't mind their presence. And Sarah and Michael said they were interested too, but they had some things to do today. As they parted ways, they decided to discuss their clan's future plans in a group chat. And so John and the girls entered his apartment. The sphere, eating sweet sticks, was surprised that guests had come to visit them. The girls were very surprised because they did not understand who she was. John then explained that the sphere was part of his hidden skill, and his sister noted that her name was Sphere. The girls were shocked by this because they didn't think that the hidden skill also had a fairy. Sphere Rising laughed and said that the girls were promising because they were able to easily appreciate all her beauty. Then John said that he was going to teach Jessica magic, so he asked not to interfere with them. The sphere began to shout that, of course, she would not interfere, and asked the guy to know his place. After some time, John, turning to Jessica, said that they had already overcome the first step towards her being able to use magic. After the girl's embarrassed reaction, the guy asked her not to react like that, because it causes misunderstanding. Then Jessica, still embarrassed, asked for forgiveness. John began to say that he had interfered with her magic circuit that time, to allow mana to flow through her unhindered. And from that moment on, the girl had to learn to independently make mana flow through her body. Jessica simply replied that she still didn't understand anything, and asked to explain how it was. Then John said that this was why he wanted to give her the opportunity to understand the sensations of mana step by step. Extending his hand to the girl, the guy said that now, just like then with the Minotaur, he was stimulating her mana. By maintaining this state, the girl would be able to comprehend the sensation of mana. Jessica then asked if that meant she would fire that spell or something like that again. John Leaf said that it was not so, and then apologized, because he would have to touch her back again. At this moment, the other girls froze in shock and did not understand what was happening. Catherine started screaming that this was sexual harassment. John immediately began to explain that in order to stimulate mana, he needed to touch her skin near her mana vessel. Sphere, observing this, realized that it seemed that John still didn't like his sister. After that, everyone started asking Jessica about what she was feeling. Shakarova's girl began to say that everything was happening the same way as last time, when her body was warm. Catherine thought that this actually sounded like what it felt like to use the skill. John began to explain that her body felt warm because he was stimulating her mana. Jessica asked not to talk about anything so sinister. Then the guy said that this was the easiest and fastest way to learn. The girl closed her eyes and said that she understood. For a magician, this quality is simply necessary, and in addition to everything, the girl has excellent control over her energy. John understood that at this rate the girl would become stronger, and now Jessica was almost at her limit and she looked completely concentrated. Then John said to imagine her adding an equal and opposite force to her energy. At this point the girl got confused and couldn't do anything, so she started asking for forgiveness. Then the guy said that she had worked hard and was doing well for her first time. After that, John gave her some medicine and told her to drink it, and then she would feel better. Jessica drank the elixir and was surprised at how amazingly it worked, because she was full of energy. Then John said that this was one of the parts of his skill. Then John told Jessica to try again, which surprised her greatly. The guy noted that such training is quite effective for learning magic. Jessica then asked if she would have to repeat the whole procedure over and over again. When John replied that this was exactly the case, his sister called her brother a real monster. Then the guy said that it seemed quite normal to him, and in any case, he would say that it should be much easier this way. At that moment the girls screamed that it was not just that, and their screams raised the alarm in the whole house. Then the sphere told the boy that he had finally strayed far from common sense. Hearing this, the guy told them to limit themselves to 50 repetitions. Everyone was shocked by John's words, and he realized that he had gone too far. Jessica agreed to do 5 reps and said she would try. Once the girl completed her training, she gained an understanding of how to control mana. John then planned to improve her accuracy by repeating this training over and over again. After some time, John, Sarah, and Catherine descended into the dungeon of almost the highest rank. Jessica sheepishly said that she couldn't wait to start working together. Catherine admitted that she was nervous because she saw how hard Jessica's workout was yesterday. John said he didn't have a good understanding of how to teach skills, but he was willing to try. When Sarah picked up the phone, John reminded her of the agreement. The girl replied that she was joking and was ready to take responsibility for the training. She then asked Catherine to tell her everything about her skill. Catherine explained that her skill was called Cupid's Magic Bow. It also allows her to impose various effects on bows and arrows. She can also make her arrows fly further or turn in a circle. Sarah asked if Catherine had used this skill in other situations. The girl replied that yes, and she added that if she finds new abilities and ways to use her skill, she will be able to defeat higher-ranking monsters. John offered to demonstrate all this in practice so that Catherine would understand it faster. Sarah decided to demonstrate her ability by defeating one of the centaurs. The girl quickly moved towards the enemy and began to use the pattern dancer. She said that this skill was originally a support to strengthen comrades, but by slightly changing the method of application, Sarah was able to fight on her own. She decided to use the boost on the centaur's hind hooves. Then he will not be able to balance the speed of his hind hooves with his front hooves. But to Catherine's surprise, the centaur fell, and John was surprised that the girl could use her skill on a separate part of the body. Sarah continued to say that after this, she would use an offensive buff on herself. It is after this that she can calmly tear her enemy to pieces and land without spending much energy. Looking at the girl with fear, she said that the fight with the centaur was over. Coming closer, she began to say that it all looked something like this, and asked Catherine if she understood. Sarah repeated that she took her skill and found a way to use it to attack. With a smile on her face, the girl asked Catherine again if everything had become clear to her. The girl simply replied that it was amazing, but she didn't understand how to use it as an example. Then Sarah said that she thought she could do something like that in no time. John said that he watched Sarah with the eye of wisdom, and then he also said that thanks to her he understood something. When Sarah asked him what exactly he realized, the guy replied that the skills were not tied to her level in any way, and the more she practiced them, the stronger she became. Catherine realized that it all depended on training and asked if she was really capable of something like that. I thought that if the girl was faithful, then the item should help Catherine become even stronger. After that, John repeated that her skill could become stronger regardless of her level. Catherine said she found it hard to believe and asked him if he was sure about it. The guy then asked if Sarah felt that the effect of her skill had become stronger. The girl replied that everything was exactly like that. It seemed to her that it was connected with the increase in her level or the increase in her characteristics. Then John said that he thought things were completely different. After that, the guy explained that they can develop their skills in the same way they increase their stats. Then Catherine asked if the guy meant that skills had their own level. John just said that the whole point is that the skills are very similar to magic. And then he added that skills really do work exactly the same as characteristics. When I think about it, I realize that it's not quite like that, but it makes it easier to grasp the concept. At this point, Catherine asks why the assessors don't show skill levels. John replies that stats are similar to levels, but they are different from each other. He adds that it may require a different device to display the level. At this point, Sarah says that such a device does not exist and asks if John is sure of his theory. John replies that he is 100% sure, and perhaps this device has not yet been invented in this world. Sarah says it would be great if the guy could do it. After this, John tells them to level up Catherine's skill and move on. Catherine asks how exactly the guy plans to do this. John replies that if skills have levels, they should also have experience points. Using new methods should give more experience than the usual ways of using her skill. After this, Sarah understands why John asked her this question. The guy tells them to remember what he told them. Catherine replies that it all sounds confusing, but she will try. Now, while defending this dungeon, they need to find ways to level up their skills. After a while, John sits and reads the information in the system, trying to understand what it all means. The guy created this system in his past life, so he doesn't understand why the status evaluator is here. After this, the guy sees the skills evaluator, which surprises him. The sphere says that perhaps it is because in his past life, John created both of these things. John asks in surprise if he really created these things. The guy realizes that he doesn't remember anything, and is surprised that he created them during a period he knows nothing about. John still doesn't understand why he learned about skills in his past life. Unfortunately, all his thoughts are useless, because he cannot understand what he was thinking about then. Sphere says that perhaps he shouldn't worry about it. Hearing this, John begins to think that the time limit is approaching, and now he must focus on clearing the crystal mines. The next morning, John introduces Catherine to the appraiser. The girl is surprised that the guy created this overnight, and the sphere says that it is all thanks to her. At this point, John suggests measuring Catherine's skill level. After the measurement, everyone is surprised that the skill actually appeared. However, Catherine's skill level turns out to be quite low, although her rank is quite high. John explains that their rank is calculated from all ranks, so her skill rank is actually quite high. Catherine says she feels uneasy, even thinking about going into a nearly high-ranking dungeon. John says that it's okay and the skill doesn't matter, because he'll get stronger anyway if she fully masters it. The guy also says that he feels like Catherine's skill has special potential, which confuses the girl. Then she looks away and says that if the guy thinks so, it makes her feel better. After this, John says that since they have confirmed her skill level, they need to go to the guild hall to train. The girl asks what kind of hall this is. She thinks they'll be heading into a dungeon, and John says that if they're going to level up her skill, this training hall would be better suited for the task. Catherine says she has a bad feeling about this for some reason. When they are in the training room, they ask the guy with scared faces what they are going to do today. John says with a confident look that the two of them will fight him. The girls are surprised and don't understand how they can cope with the guy. After that, the guy added that this is the fastest and easiest way to make them stronger. Jessica asked how they would fight him since he was so strong. Then John said that they would fight together against him alone. The guy also said that Catherine should focus on leveling up her skill, and Jessica needs to get used to using magic. John also said that by fighting together they would be able to improve their teamwork. Catherine said it all sounded logical, but she didn't understand how John would fight both of them at once. John then asked Jessica if she remembered the phrase he had recently taught her. The girl said that of course she remembered, and she should let the mana flow throughout her body. Then John said that it was called verbal magic, and he added that if they fail, he has a backup plan, so they shouldn't worry. Then Catherine took the bow in her hands and asked if the guy knew that she could get hurt. Then John said that if they actually managed to hurt him, he would buy them coffee. The girl finally shouted that she would need coffee with an extra portion of milk and sugar. Now the fight began. John deftly dodged all the arrows. The guy thought that the girl had a unique ability to turn arrows into water. John certainly saw that Cupid's magical bow lived up to its name. But for the girl to feel successful, the guy would let her hit him. After a few dodges, Catherine began to deal new damage. At this time, Jessica tried to concentrate her energy and attack the enemy. John was surprised that the girl was able to cover it with water for better electrical conductivity, and he said that if the arrows didn't hit him, it didn't matter at all. Catherine screamed that the guys couldn't dodge in the air at all, and John praised the girl for changing the trajectory of the arrows. At that moment, Catherine was surprised that the guy was able to predict her actions. Jessica began to speak so that a crimson flame would emerge from her energy and burn everything to the ground. At that moment, a huge explosion rushed straight towards John. The guy realized that the girl was doing great too. She got it right on the first try. Then the guy stopped the blow and absorbed it. Catherine wondered what magic really was. Finally, John said that the girls had done an amazing job with the plan, and he added that they even gave him goosebumps. Catherine was angry that the guy didn't even break a sweat. Suddenly, Jessica asked the guy if he could use magic too. When the guy said that it was, she asked why he made her use it that time. John was confused by her question and decided to remain silent. And then he decided to clarify that he really couldn't use magic then. Jessica then said she just felt a little uneasy about how easily he handled it. Catherine praised the girl for her courage. At this point, John said he wanted them to come up with new ways to attack him. And then he asked if they understood everything, to which the girls firmly answered yes. After the battle, John noted that the girls had done a great job for the first day, and he was pleasantly surprised that they had done much better than he could have imagined. Catherine was confused. They had attacked the enemy so many times, but not a single blow had even touched him. John stated that he would make them at least as strong as he was. Jessica couldn't believe it, but the guy understood that people often become stronger without even noticing the process. Suddenly, an alarmed Michael burst in with bad news. John looked at his friend anxiously and began to wait for an explanation. The boys started talking about Frank, and John asked what had happened to him. It turned out that Frank had entered the crystal mines and had not returned yet. A few days before this incident, the company went on holiday to the Blue Sea. During the summer holidays, Kitty wanted to go on a trip and persuaded her brother to go with her to the tropical islands. Jessica walked next to John and thanked him for inviting her to join the trip. John replied that he should thank her because it was much more fun together. At that moment, a sphere appeared from the bag and noticed that they were not alone here. It was also present. John shrugged, and the fairy added that his job was to give detailed explanations. Jessica, observing their interaction, noted that they get along very well with each other. At this moment, John noticed a strange expression on his sister's face and asked what had happened. Kitty asked her brother if he had anything to say about seeing them in their bathing suits. John, looking away in embarrassment, replied that the bathing suits suited them very well. The little sister agreed, but something was still bothering her. Suddenly, her gaze brightened. She remembered something important. The girl began to worry about where Sarah and Catherine were now. Jessica noted that they were walking for too long and should have changed by now. Suddenly, they saw Sarah trying to pull Catherine out, assuring her that everything was fine and there was nothing to worry about. The girl was clearly embarrassed that she was wearing a swimsuit. She looked awkwardly at the ground. When Jessica and Kitty saw Catherine in a bathing suit, they started screaming with delight, realizing how well the outfit suited her. Sarah reassured Catherine that everything was exactly as she said, but the girl was still ashamed. Sarah expressed surprise at her shyness and smiled. Catherine turned to John, asking if the swimsuit really suited her. The guy replied that, in his opinion, it suited her very well. Catherine was surprised at how calm John looked. The girls started to joke that the guy should have blushed when he saw them in bathing suits, although that would have been even worse. Sarah announced that they were there and suggested that they all go swimming. Kitty asked her brother what he would be doing during this time. John said he would just guard their things and they could go have fun. The little sister happily thanked her brother and went swimming. At this time, the sphere noticed that no one could have thought that the guy would travel with only girls. John explained that he had not planned this, and had simply invited those with whom Kitty had already become friends. Sphere continued that, in her opinion, this is simply the guy's character, because she understands how much he loves his little sister. When John closed his eyes, the fairy began to wonder if the boy really didn't think he was weird. She also thought that if she remembered his past life, it all made sense. John opened one eye and suggested that the sphere go for a swim. The fairy replied that such childish amusements did not interest her, and she would prefer to elegantly enjoy sunbathing. John thought that he wasn't interested in that either, and closed his eyes. Suddenly, he noticed a man who was kneeling and doing something. After this, the man stood up, holding a wallet in his hands. When people approached one of the bags, they were surprised that their bag was empty. John realized that the man had stolen their things and began to get up. He asked the sphere to look after their things. The fairy agreed to take it upon herself. John followed the man and started yelling at him to turn around. The whole crowd looked at the guy, and he demanded that the man return what he had stolen. The thief, looking worried, replied that he needed to be caught first. The thief added that, unfortunately, he had the skill of a runner. John replied that since the man had the skill, he too would not hold back. Unexpectedly for the thief, the guy jumped right at him. Within seconds, John had the man down on the ground and immobilized him. After that, the guy took the wallet and said that he was still able to catch it. Everyone around began to applaud, admiring this spectacle. A couple who lost their wallet decided to return to the place where they left it. However, when they arrived, their wallet was still in place, and the man was perplexed. He was sure that they had checked everything. John was lying down at that moment and listening to their conversation. Sarah came up to him and complimented him on his great performance, although that was to be expected. She also joked that she could film it all, like last time. When John asked him to stop, the girl just waved it off, saying it was a joke. Sarah said the girls were playing beach volleyball and came to invite the guy to join in while she looked after things. The girl also explained her arrival by saying that she decided to take a little rest, and added that John's little sister clearly wants him to play with them. With a smile on her face, Sarah added that she was saying this because she was very kind. Upon seeing her brother, Kitty immediately announced that he would be on her team, and Jessica and Catherine would be on the other. One of the girls confidently stated that they really can win at beach volleyball. John smiled and said, okay, he would give in to them. The guy understood that they came here for their little sister, but he liked this kind of summer. Meanwhile, there was a man in the Adventurers Guild. He reported that the high-ranking dungeons had led everyone to a dead end, and they had lost contact with a clan of the same high rank that had recently entered the mine. In response to this news, they decided to raise the crystal mine's danger level from high to super high. The man knew that it would be a big problem if the demons ever got out of such a large dungeon, so he asked someone to take on this task. A super high-class adventurer named Ryan said he had no problem with it. Ryan understood that he was allowed to explore large dungeons alone. There were only 9 super high-class adventurers in the country, and there were no exams to promote to that level. All adventurers of this class were the best in the country, capable of surpassing each other. Some of the dungeon rules set by the guild did not apply to them, and they could freely go through all the dungeons alone. Ryan announced that the cleanup would begin tomorrow and asked if the men had any questions. The man replied that there was no problem and thanked the guy. Ryan expressed his joy at this and looked at the man one last time. As Ryan walked down the elevator, he thought about how he had received a call from the master asking him to attack a super high-class dungeon. The guy understood that his schedule was a bit tight, and because of this, the dungeon would have to be cleared quickly. At this time, Sarah entered the conference room and thanked everyone for waiting. Michael began to apologize for calling everyone so unexpectedly. The boy explained that the clan he used to be a part of lost contact with everyone during the attack on the Crystal Mines dungeon. Sarah was surprised to hear that the boy had once been a member of this clan. She added that she had heard a lot of bad things about the Red Dragon. Of course, most of these rumors were about the leader, not the clan itself. John watched their dialogue and thought that the girl was indeed right. Michael started to tell that Frank was really a very bad person, and no one could do anything about it. That's why the guy wanted to ask everyone for help. The boy felt very sad that he was so selfish. After this, Michael asked if they could help him and go save the Red Dragon clan. At this point, Sarah asked if everyone would have to go to a dangerous place to help a terrible man. The boy admitted that it was all damn selfish. He was always treated badly in the clan, and the leader constantly pestered him. However, if he could help, he would. So now he is turning to his team for help. Then Sarah said that they all could be in danger too. Michael replied that his strategy was minimal, and he only wanted to save the Red Dragon. One girl looked at Jessica and Catherine and asked what their opinion was. Then they replied that they wanted to go to the dungeon, and that was their goal. But they were afraid to go there with their current abilities. John began to reason that in order to get into the crystal mine, they needed at least 5 people. But it was too dangerous to take 2 people with their current strength. Moreover, even if they help the market, there is a chance that it will not reciprocate. Michael only said that he thought it was natural for a man to refuse because his life was at risk, and he himself thought that since no one agreed, he would go alone. At this point, John asked Michael if he really wanted to save Frank. Michael was adamant that if it was possible, then he really wanted it. He started to tell me that Frank was a nice guy at first. His skills were not very strong, so people laughed at him when he was a new adventurer. However, Frank continued to train his skills and his body, and soon became stronger. As a result, the man stopped believing in others, looked down on those around him, and sought conflict. Knowing his past, Michael felt some sympathy for him. John said he understood the boy's feelings perfectly, and then he offered his help, surprising all his clanmates. Sarah asked Michael what he was going to do if he didn't have enough men to enter the dungeon. John asked if they really just needed to come in, leaving Sarah confused. The guy decided to enter the dungeon by brute force in front of the guards. The girl laughed and said that he was offering really interesting ideas. If John had broken the rules of the dungeon, he would have been punished. But the girl decided to help the Red Dragon. Michael, hearing this, turned to the guy and thanked him with all his heart. At this point, Sarah began to think about helping Michael too. She added that the place was dangerous and she would regret it if she let them both die. The girls from the clans said that they were sorry they couldn't help, because their current abilities would only slow them down. John at this point told them not to worry and just keep training well. They found themselves next to a super high-class dungeon crystal mine. John announced that he was going to use invisibility magic on everyone, which would make them unrecognizable to others. Sarah was surprised that the guy could do this, and Michael just said that this was to be expected from him. John began to explain that when they used invisibility, they would be invisible to each other, so he ordered them to head to the dungeon gates on their own. After these words, the guy began to use invisibility on the guys. This surprised everyone very much, because they had not seen each other. As John headed towards the entrance, he overheard the men talking about how the crystal mines were quite a complex dungeon. They were talking about the rumors that the dungeon's danger level had been raised to super high class. John began to think that he might even be able to get to him this time, but it wouldn't be easy. At this point, the guards began to discuss what happened to the guys from the Red Dragon clan. One of them said they might already be dead. They started discussing that they would then get what they deserved, and it would be quite unusual to see them dead. At that moment, John thought that even if Frank was a bad guy, there was no point in saying bad things about him. At that moment, one of the guards almost fell and said that it felt like someone was pushing him. After some time, the guys made their way into the dungeon unnoticed and began to thank John. Then the guy replied that they were just getting started. The dungeon in the crystal mine is large, and the Red Dragon train is very difficult. John also said that the difficulty level has been changed to super high, making it even more dangerous. However, this is the second time they have tried the Red Dragon, so they will not go where they looked last time. After this, John said that they needed to check these places first, and Sarah agreed with him. Michael also said that there were few signs of demons there, so they could safely go deeper into the dungeon. John clarified that the Red Dragon had already defeated the demons, so there weren't many of them. And after they saw one of them, the guy realized that there were still a few left. When Michael saw the crystal deer, he became very worried because this demon was very fast. The deer began to quickly approach the boys. At that moment, John decided to fight him himself, which greatly surprised the boy. The guy ordered Sarah and Michael to watch the perimeter. John reasoned that if he defeated the demons alone, he would gain all the experience he needed. He thought it was useful that he had cleared the hidden dungeons of almost high level, because thanks to this, he was able to defeat the deer in one hit. The Coordination Demon activates the magic power contained within the Coordination Demon and circulates throughout the body at high speed. Physical abilities are greatly increased compared to the Coordination Demon. That's why John's level was rising sharply. After the guy finished dealing with the deer, he calmly looked at the guys and asked if they could continue. Michael was amazed at the boy's strength, and firmly replied that, of course, they could continue. He understood that John was just as high-class an adventurer as they were, but this was a whole new level. Sarah, at that moment, thought that he was much stronger than she imagined. At that moment, she shouted that she couldn't wait for the guy to become famous. At this time, the paparazzi asked one of the guys if he was going to challenge the attack in the dungeon. Ryan walked and thought about where these people could have gotten this information. After that, he told them that the dungeon cores and high-difficulty ones must be destroyed as soon as possible. When asked about the guy's job, Ryan replied that he planned to use the free time in his schedule to attack dungeons. It was shown on TV, and Sphere was watching it with Kitty at that moment. The fairy said that the future super high-level adventurer probably received a lot of attention from the press, unlike John. At that moment, Kitty said that in fact her brother and that guy were very similar in some way. The Sphere only said that recently the girl began to speak in a somewhat friendly manner. And then she began to explain that John and Ryan were classmates in the past and played together. Hearing this, the fairy was shocked and began to scream in surprise. The girl began to wonder what would happen if the guy found out that her brother was an adventurer. She realized that Ryan would be surprised. At this time, John and the guys arrived in a safe area of the dungeon where the demons could not reach them. Michael understood that from this moment on, the demons became exceptionally strong. John began to think that the boy was very experienced in dungeons, and it was very surprising that he was able to remember such a route with only one experience. Sarah began to say that the structure of the dungeon was different from the others, and the atmosphere was different. The demons are so powerful that facing two or more at once is quite dangerous. Michael realized that this was where Frank had gone, since it was more likely. Suddenly, the boy shouted out that he had developed a strategy, and Sarah immediately asked about it. Michael's skill was manipulating smoke, and he decided to find Frank and the others that way. It's basically a support skill that causes allies to carry smoke with supporting effects and buffs allies. However, this time the smoke spreads throughout the dungeon. Like a radar, it will cover a large area and detect adventurers. Michael said it took a lot of energy, but luckily John killed all the demons along the way himself. They also suggested that using such skills in a large dungeon might be reckless. However, Michael absolutely had to find Frank, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to save him. As the smoke began to envelop the dungeon, John said that the speed of the smoke was very high, and at this rate, they would quickly find Frank. He also said that the speed depends on how far their clan has been able to advance. Michael continued to search for Frank with all his might, and thought that he was not the type to die in a place like this. The boy remembered asking him if he was going to become a super high-class adventurer. The man answered him that he was not interested in titles and honors. However, if he had this title, then others would begin to bow to him. Frank knew that he would, of course, like all of